Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It's May 31st, 2023. I'm your host, Nate Pike. Alberta went and had itself an election. We're going to talk about that in a little bit more, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for what I'm hoping is going to be a spirited discussion tonight, because there's been a lot that's gone on in the land of Alberta politics. Not just the election that we had, but since the election, the drama has already started. We're going to talk about the drama first. We're going to do things in a little bit of a strange order. We're going to talk about the drama first. We're going to talk about the election. We're going to do something a little bit special. Before we get into that, though, I want to give a little bit of a shout out to some folks in the healthcares. And full disclosure, I totally have a bias on this because I work in the healthcares. But I found myself a little while ago. I've been sort of feeling a little under the weather for a little bit, and I woke up and was not feeling well at all. I was sick enough that my wife said to the kids, he's going to go into the hospital later, but it's going to take him a couple of hours to figure it out, because anybody who has ever spent any time with a sick healthcare worker knows that we're kind of like farmers. We don't go we don't take good care of ourselves at all when it comes to, oh, I think things might be something wrong. But halfway through the day, I started to feel like somebody had shot an arrow through the right side of my chest. It was very uncomfortable. I spent 2 or 3 hours writing that off as a pulled muscle, uh, because I work in healthcare and that's what we do. Eventually, I started to realize, I think there might be something else going on. I went into one of the urgent care facilities here in the Calgary area, and within a few hours, maybe six, I had gone from being in really, really terrible pain to having a bunch of diagnostics done, and I was diagnosed with my right lung wasn't really talking to the rest of my body, apparently. Don't get pneumonia. I don't recommend it. And that kind of took me out of commission. But we've still been doing lots of stuff in the background. There's still been lots of stuff going on. But I just wanted to say two things about my recent healthcare experience as a patient. First of all, a huge thank you and mad props to everybody who was involved in my care. It was nothing but extremely professional. And we complain and we get frustrated with the longer wait times, and certainly there are conditions for which longer wait times definitely contribute to negative outcomes. But for the vast majority, like, you think about the reality that I got to go to a healthcare facility, I got fancy diagnostics done, I had my problem diagnosed, and treatment started within 8 hours of me walking in the doors. That's pretty awesome. Also, I didn't have to pay for any of it, which is also pretty awesome. I had to pay for the more than a few drugs that they put me on once they sent me home, but uh, the I didn't have to pay for access to any of that care, and that's tremendous. That's a really awesome thing that we have in this province. But I also wanted to say, one of the things that was most striking to me about my personal healthcare experience was, I use humor as a way to disarm tension. And so I was making jokes and being ridiculous, and my wife was being incredibly patient with me and giving me a lot of latitude. We had a little picnic with lifesavers in the middle of the bed that I was on. It was quite delightful. They couldn't figure out why my tongue was green for a little bit, but that's okay. Um, but the number of healthcare workers that I encountered who were shocked that I wasn't angry, I wasn't impatient, that to me was really quite alarming, uh, because what that says to me is they're encountering a lot of hostility and a lot of negativity and a lot of anger. And, people in crisis do things that people in crisis do, but be nice to your healthcare workers, because it's not only is it just the right thing to do, but it very clearly is having an impact on them. So don't be a jerk if you need to access the wonderful free healthcare that we have in this country, because it's pretty awesome. So I wanted to give a huge shout out and a big thanks to all the healthcare workers, not just the ones who are involved in my care, but all across the province. Nothing but love. So there's my story about that. And we're going to get right into the things. like I said, we're going to do things in a little bit of a strange order because we're going to talk about the post-election and then we're going to talk about the election. And we're going to do something a little bit different tonight in the sense that we're going to do what's called a SWOT analysis. And we're going to do that on the NDP campaign. Now, we've been talking with a bunch of people over the last few days and in the lead up to the election so that we could pull this off. And we some people who are much smarter, certainly than me, have contributed to this, and we're very, very grateful for that. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec, because we got to start off with it took, I don't know, less than 24 hours before Danielle Smith started to, as the newly elected premier, she started to lean into some of the more, let's go with problematic elements of her. Well, we can't really call it her campaign now, can we? Because she was very, very clear. No, this isn't part of the campaign. But the next day, she got into an interesting interpretation of the history of the discussion on the Alberta police force so far.
The things we got feedback from our municipalities is that they wanted the option to look at different policing options. So we've funded studies for about a dozen municipalities who are considering having their own police force, which is what Grande Prairie ultimately decided to do. There are others that want us to set up sheriff's detachments, and there are others who are looking at regional policing. So we're being responsive to what our municipalities want, and we're continuing to build out new units of our sheriff's division. So that's the approach that we have taken in response to some of the concerns that we heard.
Now, let's be clear. Grande Prairie, when they made the decision to go with their own municipal police force, they did so with, let's go with little to no consultation with the people of Grande Prairie. And there's a lot of people who are very, very upset about the fact, and there's already conversation about the fact that that's likely going to be one of the biggest issues in the next municipal election in Grande Prairie. But overwhelmingly, the feedback that has been loudly communicated by municipalities across the province of Alberta is we're very happy with the RCMP, those who have the RCMP, to be clear. We're very happy with the RCMP. We'd like to see some more resources, sure, but we would also like to stay with the RCMP. We don't want to go through the dumpster fire of trying to set up our own municipal police force. But Danielle Smith has been pushing the idea of a provincial police force for quite some time. And it's obviously something that she's going to try to soft pedal. And as more than a few people predicted, she's going to try to use the sheriffs, the Alberta sheriffs, to do that. Now, a little bit of history on the Alberta sheriffs is important because there's some heated discussion going on in the light of Danielle Smith's comments. The sheriffs as an entity were only formed in the province of Alberta in 2006, and they came out of the need to have people guarding and transporting prisoners between the court system and the incarceration system. They evolved out of that. And in 2006, they started taking on more and more responsibilities. It's very, very clear that Danielle Smith wants to make sure that not only do they continue to take on more responsibilities, but they also continue to expand the areas that they're operating in. We've heard lots of stories, though, about the fact that the sheriffs are having some difficulties with recruitment. There's also very real concerns that have been expressed not only by municipalities, but by experts in policing, that when you talk about the type of training that goes into, let's say, an organization like the Calgary Police Service or the Edmonton Police Service versus the sheriffs, and it's a pretty big difference in the amount of training that's required. There's more than a few pundits who have observed the fact that there's a lot of people who have, I shouldn't say a lot, some people who weren't able to get on with organizations like the Calgary Police Service or the Edmonton Police Service, who instead then pivoted to a role with the sheriffs. I'm not denigrating the sheriffs. I want to be really, really clear about that. But we can't be comparing apples to oranges as much as Danielle Smith seems to want to. It's very clear that this is going to be a big ongoing issue in the province of Alberta because it's one of the things that she made it very, very clear on day one that she wanted to be addressing and pushing forward. Now, one of the other topics that came up in that interview had to do with the Alberta pension plan. Now, this has been a hotbed discussion item, and it's one that Danielle Smith wisely punted out of the election. Now, you can call it disingenuous. You can call it dishonest, But the fact of the matter is, Danielle Smith took the two biggest issues that were going to hurt her. This gets relevant later, by the way, that were going to potentially hurt her in the election and said, you know what, we're not campaigning on that, so we're not going to talk about that. Thanks. We'll talk about that later. Took less than 24 hours before she got into it, but that's a thing that she did. Now, the pension plan has a lot of people concerned because there's a lot of uncertainty. There was a report that was commissioned coming out of the Fair Deal panel that Travis Taves, the former Minister of Finance, well, yeah, he's still part of executive council, I think, until they swear in a new executive council. But he commissioned a report that was supposed to come out in 2022 to take a look at the financial costs and benefits of going with an Alberta pension plan. And then they said, it turns out we maybe want to tweak it a little bit before we release it. Danielle Smith has said it was supposed to be released in May. Here we are, May 31st. No report released yet. That report is going to allegedly be released to the public. And then one of the other recommendations that came out of the Fair Deal panel is that it also needs to be put to a referendum. Now, there's another really important piece that needs to be considered. Alberta can't unilaterally withdraw from the CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan. There has to be a negotiation that goes on, and 7 out of 10 provinces have to agree that they're cool with Alberta leaving the pension plan, which is a hell of a sales pitch, especially if you consider that the argument that Danielle Smith and the UCP are putting forward, which is open to some interpretation, is that, hey, you know what? Alberta puts in more to the pension plan than we're actually currently getting out of it, so we're not getting a great return on investment. But the inverse of that argument, presumably, is that the rest of Canada is. So why would the rest of Canada say, hey, you know what, at this point in time, and it's going to change as demographics shift, to be clear, that's been well established. But at this point in time, we're getting more out of Alberta than the pension plan is playing into it. So why would we agree to be like, okay, no, it's cool, take your money and run? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it's a bit of a extremely complicated minefield that needs to be navigated if Alberta was to decide to go ahead with some form of Alberta pension plan. But here's what Danielle Smith had to say when she was asked about that.
Comes to the Canada pension, I understand how our legislation works. No province is able to leave the Canada pension without being able to offer equal or better benefits. And that was a study that Albertans asked us to commission, is what would it look like if we had an Alberta pension plan? Would the benefits be better? Would it make sense? We were expecting that report to be finished in May, so I'm assuming it's going to be landing very soon. When it becomes available, we'll really release it to the public and have a broader conversation about it. But the panel that looked into this and asked us to do the study said that no decision should be made without a province-wide referendum. So we want to gauge whether or not there's an appetite for that, and that we have to make sure that the work is done first.
So if you take Danielle Smith at her word, and I know as I say those words out loud how I'm going to get some comments on that. But she's not wrong about the fact that the panel did recommend that any decisions would have to go to a referendum. So if the UCP, if Danielle Smith decided that they wanted to go ahead with this pension plan, they would then have to go to all of Alberta and sell it. And that's a much harder sales pitch than, hey, we'd like to build an arena. There are, especially when you consider that a large part of the demographic that is reliant on pensions right now, or will be reliant on pensions in the future, makes up some of the biggest chunks of the UCP's voter base. That's exactly why Danielle Smith punted it off of the election. She didn't want to have that conversation. She didn't want to risk that conversation during the election. So it's difficult to imagine that the UCP would be able to sell a referendum to the entire province of Alberta that we should withdraw from the CPP and go with an APP, especially when the simple process of putting together the report is already almost half a year late. But that's not all. because of course that's not all that we had to navigate in the brief short hours since the election, because Danielle Smith also went on the radio with Shay Ganem, and she made some comments that have a lot of people deeply concerned.
You make sure that Edmonton is not overlooked and feels like they have a voice at the table.
Yeah, I've already thought about that, and I'm going to put together an Edmonton council of some of the candidates who I know are going to want to run again. There are a couple of fantastic candidates, many in fact, in Edmonton, and some got a lot closer than I think anybody ever would have expected. And so I'm going to rely on them to continue giving me advice, because our capital city is vitally important to the overall success of Alberta. And I'm there a lot during session, of course, and we've got a lot of investment that we need to do. We've got a lot of support that we need to give to the city of Edmonton in dealing with their public disorder and mental health and addictions crisis. And so I will have a good, strong team of advisors making sure that nothing gets missed in Edmonton.
So again, that's Danielle Smith saying that she's going to put together a panel, a council of unsuccessful UCP leadership candidates to try to advise her on how to best represent Edmonton. And as more than a few legal scholars and lawyers have pointed out, that's kind of a really big problem, because she's already identified in that statement. And as we've seen with the ethics commissioner report into the whole Artur Pawlowski, there's certain statements that Danielle Smith hung herself on. When we're talking about the Artur Pawlowski scandal, the thing that got Danielle Smith in trouble was the fact that she said that she was concerned about the optics of Artur Pawlowski holding a press conference and saying, Danielle Smith, she's the worst. That gave her a personal and immediate benefit from trying to make the Artur Pawlowski thing go away. Well, that clip that you just heard there makes it very, very clear that she's putting together this council based on people that she expects are going to run again. So she would be using government resources. Even if these people aren't getting paid, she's using government resources to amplify the profile of candidates who are going to run in the next election. Right back, apparently, in line with conflict of interest. Now, that doesn't even say anything about the fact that she hasn't addressed whether or not the members of this council are going to get any sort of pay, or they're going to get any sort of honorarium. Because if they get any kind of pay, if they get any kind of honorarium, then we're back into a place where now we're using government money to pay people who lost an election to represent Edmonton, as if there were no MLAs that were elected in Edmonton, which is pretty wild, because there were MLAs who were elected to Edmonton. But even more so, there's an entire city council in Edmonton, and it's part of their job to represent the people of Edmonton to, among other things, the provincial government. So for Danielle Smith to say, you know what, well, we had this election, but we're going to get rid of a bunch of people who we're going to ignore a bunch of people who were rightfully elected to represent the constituents of the Edmonton area. We're going to ignore them. And instead, I'm going to choose to listen to my own unsuccessful candidates. It's really quite mind-boggling. But it's one of the things that Danielle has apparently decided that she wants to pursue, which is pretty wild. Moving on from there, though, let's talk for a little bit. Let's get into it. Let's talk about election 2023. Because we did. We went and had us an election. The results, they're close in a lot of areas. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But the results are pretty clear. And we've got those results right here. But before we get into the specifics of who won and by how much, there's some numbers that are worth looking at. Now, the first one is declined ballots. A lot of people have been asking what's a declined ballot. And a declined ballot is a ballot where somebody goes to the polling place and they take their ballot and they say, these choices are garbage, I'm not going to vote. And they hand the ballot back. That's the process for marking a protest vote, because it very, very clearly gets specified that that's where the protest lies. So it's really important to be aware of that, because the next number is the rejected ballots. The rejected ballots are the ballots that, for whatever reason, somebody drew a smiley face inside the little circle, or they drew a circle around the circle, or there's a whole list of possible things that can cause a ballot to be rejected. That number, a lot of people have been saying, oh, hey, that's a really big number. It's actually not. It's pretty on par with previous elections. What gets interesting, though, is the number of registered voters. So there's 2.8 million registered voters in the province of Alberta. Now, that doesn't include eligible voters. Those are the registered voters. There's also voters who are eligible to vote that just aren't registered. And Elections Alberta did an interesting thing while they were covering their numbers. For a very brief period of time, they put up a number with the caption eligible voters. And it was 3.2 and then some other numbers million people in the province of Alberta were eligible to vote. Now, the unofficial turnout, which is made up of the registered voters, is 62%, which, depending on how you choose to look at it, is either good or bad. Historically, voter turnout tends to be quite low. There's a whole conversation to be had around that. But 62% also means that 37.61% of Albertans who were registered, they're on the list of voters. They said, yeah, I'm not going to be voting this time around, which is pretty telling about how people feel about what their options are. That's an important conversation to be had. But let's take a look at what the results were by party. When we pulled these today, there are some judicial recounts that are happening. There's at least 2 judicial recounts that are happening because the results were so close. But as of today, there are 38 seats for the Alberta New Democratic Party. There are 49 seats for the United Conservative Party. And everybody else is pretty much statistical rounding error when it comes to percentage of vote earned. The NDP earned 44.02%. The UCP earned 52.59%. There's literally no other parties that earned even close to, even a percent. And perhaps most striking is the Alberta Party, who in 2019 earned roughly 10% of the overall vote. And this time around, they earned 0.72% of the overall vote. Just to make sure that we can see all the numbers here, we've got 2019 results on the screen here. In 2019, the UCP earned 54.88% of the popular vote. The NDP earned 32.67% of the popular vote. The Alberta Party earned 9.08% of the popular vote. The Alberta Party were absolutely routed in this election. Now, it's important to note the Alberta Party didn't run a full slate, but in 2019, they were the 3rd party ranked. In 2023, the next highest ranked party after the NDP is the Green Party of Alberta, which is kind of wild. Because historically, the Green Party has been a party that, people made jokes about, talked about a little bit. Oh, the Greens are allegedly running some candidates. And the Greens technically came in 3rd in this election, which is notable. But let's get into the SWOT analysis, because this gets to be an important part of the conversation. For anybody who's not familiar with the term SWOT, it's a tool that's very often used after any kind of major project or campaign, where the acronym is strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Basically, what you do is you go through each one of those categories. You identify some things that were strengths. You identify some things that were weaknesses. You identify some opportunities. You identify some threats. We went to some people who know these things, and we asked them for some ideas before the election, after the election. What are some things that you would put under these categories? So we're going to start with the strengths for the NDP. I mean, for the UCP, it's pretty straightforward. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their opportunities, and their threats all carry the name Danielle Smith. That's just the reality, and that's part of the reason why we see with this election a significant drop in the number of seats between 2019 and 2023. This election was for the UCP a very effectively controlled fall. It's kind of like landing a plane. They landed the plane. They didn't crash into the ground. The NDP had some pretty high expectations. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Once we get to the open mic part, after we're done with our regular programming, if anybody wants to talk about the UCP side of things, we're going to open up the mic. We're committed to staying till at least 11 because the show's probably going to go long today, and we want to make sure that anybody who wants to speak gets the opportunity to. So give us another half hour or so, and then we'll open up the mic to anybody who has any thoughts that they want to share. So under strengths, what we were told that the NDP did really well in this election, in this campaign, the biggest thing that everybody came back to was the individual policies that they put forward were all quite good. So, for example, the proposed elimination of the small business tax. That's something that could have had a very real impact for the segment of the economy that represents something like 95% of business done. Small businesses make up a much larger portion of the economy than a lot of people realize. And eliminating that small business tax would open a lot of channels for folks to be able to be more effective, to invest more in their business. So that was identified as being potentially a really good policy. Now, another one of the policies that was highlighted also had to do around the public safety piece. So the public safety was one of the big concerns that a lot of people had manufactured for them coming into this election. And the UCP responded by saying, we're going to put this many more boots on the ground. And the NDP responded by saying, well, not only are we going to put boots on the ground, we're actually going to put social workers and mental health professionals on the ground with the police so that people in crisis have different pathways that they can potentially go down. They'll actually have people who are trained in mental health crisis to deal with the things. Another really big one that a lot of people thought, this one came up in a lot of our conversations, the no increase in the income tax. So the NDP committed to not increasing income taxes. They made a broad array of healthcare commitments that were identified as being positive things, strong things. One of the biggest ones that came up, though, had to do with the piece around affordability. And the NDP put forward a policy where they said not only were they going to do a couple of other different affordability measures, but the big one was they were going to put caps back on utilities and caps back on insurance, because those are two of the biggest areas that Albertans have universally identified as being part of the biggest problem when it comes to affordability. Hasn't been any debate around that. That's part of the reason why the UCP got rid of the fuel tax. That's part of the reason why the UCP made commitments early on about suspending. There's people who are going to be paying for it a lot pretty quick here, but reducing costs on utilities. The costs of utilities aren't up for debate. The NDP put together a really good package in regards to putting together the caps for that. And they also said that they were going to get rid of the Sovereignty Act, which is that was one that a lot of people who are more sort of policy wonks and constitutional geeks were like, yeah, it's got to go. because it's just, if it ever gets utilized, it's just going to be straight up embarrassing. So identifying that, getting rid of that, very, very good thing. Those were some of the big strengths that were identified. So we want to start with those because there's some weaknesses we got to talk about. And these are, again, weaknesses that were identified by folks who work in communications, who have experience in political campaigns. That these are the big things that they were concerned about. The biggest one was that it seemed like the NDP were way behind the UCP when it came to the not official start of the campaign. You might remember as far back as February and March, there were multiple columns, multiple articles that were written about, hey, you know what? We got a problem here because the UCP are campaigning like crazy. Danielle Smith is traveling the province. She's doing all of these high-profile constituency association meetings. She's attending the AGMs. She's all over the place. And this was something that was a lot of people raised a lot of concern about. Max Fawcett wrote a column back in February or March where he said now's the time for the NDP to start to be thinking about hitting the panic button because they're not in the game. They gave Danielle Smith the opportunity to not only run through the entire leadership race, but also from there continue to campaign all the way through her 2 legislative sessions and coming out of those into the election. And Danielle Smith and the UCP were very effective with utilizing government resources, sometimes in distasteful, arguably unethical, some people said potentially illegal ways. But the NDP gave up that whole field. One of the biggest areas that was identified, though, had to do with the communications that the NDP utilized. And you can see this even if you went to their Alberta's Future website. It was if you wanted to look at what their commitments were, it was more listed in, it seemed like chronological order than topical order. So there were healthcare commitments and there were some other things and there were some more healthcare commitments and then there were some other things and there were more healthcare commitments. It presented as being somewhat disorganized. It presented as creating, the term that we heard, was barriers to entry. Because if you wanted to know about a specific healthcare policy, you had to go hunting for it. It wasn't all just in a bam, bam, there you go, easy to look at thing. One of the other big concerns had to do with how the NDP managed their communications with media. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword because we heard some people say that they thought the way that the NDP handled Angry Caillou, Cian Bexty, was incredibly effective because Rachel Notley refused him entry to any of the press conferences, and she was very effective at labeling him, which many people would agree with, by the way, a protester, not any sort of reporter or journalist. Now, Mr. Bexty's own website bears no shortage of history as to factual inaccuracies or fiction, some people might say. Mr. Bexty was the source of the climate police that we saw referenced during the Alberta Prosperity Project debates that were co-hosted by the Rebel, that Danielle Smith leaned all the way into. It was pretty much pure fiction. So there is a strong argument to be made, especially by the way that Mr. Bexty chooses to insert himself into his stories, as well as the way that he chooses to take an extremely adversarial and combative tone. There's an argument, very valid one, to be made. Yeah, he's absolutely not a journalist. He's a protester. A lot of people liked how how Rachel Notley handled the Bexty situation. But the flip side of that was the way that they handled the Western Standard. Now, for anyone who's not familiar, there's a little bit of backstory context that's really important to understand. And that backstory context is, a while back, The Western Standard ran an absolute garbage editorial that speculated, well, if the NDP win, they're probably going to make Janice Irwin the Minister of Education. And, you know, if you let one of those people in, then we're probably going to be seeing trans story time in schools and litter boxes because kids think they're animals, and it's cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. It was a super, super gross article, and one that the author later apologized for writing, and the Western Standard deleted from their website. The Western Standard, however, did not apologize for publishing the article. The NDP's approach to this was to say to the Western Standard, well, until you as a entity, so there's the first mistake that was identified for us. They treated the Western Standard as an entity. They didn't go after the individual like they did with Bexty. They went after the entity. Until the entity apologizes for the way that they treated Janice Irwin, which was horrifying, they were not going to entertain any questions from the Western Standard. The communications people that we talk to have been very clear. Not the way to handle it. And in fact, we heard from more than a couple people, and I share this opinion myself, or whatever that's worth. The correct way to handle that would have been to say, hey, you know what? You're absolutely right. Janice Irwin, prior to being an MLA, she was a teacher. And she's got significant advanced education in regards to teaching. She knows how to be a teacher. She knows how the system works. There's literally no one more qualified in the entire legislature to be the Minister of Education than Janice Irwin. So you're absolutely right, Western Standard. We will make Janice Irwin the Minister of Education when we're elected. And she's going to do a fantastic job. And no amount of hateful rhetoric that your outlet chooses to publish is going to impact our decision, or is it going to change how incredibly qualified Janice Irwin would be for the role? Next question. But instead, the NDP tried to freeze out the Western Standard. Now, the Western Standard, I've made my thoughts on the show about the quality of the Western Standard's work and their inherent bias in all of their work and their affiliation with other organizations. Some people say that the Western Standard acts very much as a rage farm and a propaganda machine for the people that they like. There's lots to criticize about the Western Standard. There's no shortage of things to criticize about the Western Standard. But there is a very strong perception that the NDP created by going down that road of the NDP is trying to silence freedom of the press. The Western Standard is perceived by some people to have significantly more legitimacy than Mr. Bexty. And because they went that road and they shut out everybody from that outlet, instead of making that conversation go away, instead of taking a hard stance and advocating for one of their, many people believe, most amazing MLAs, instead of doing those things, they extended the conversation. They made it a point of vulnerability, which turned it into a distraction in a lot of ways. One of the biggest weaknesses, though, that has been identified over and over and over again for us, and it's not a new topic of conversation. We certainly saw it with some of the shows that we did, not at the beginning of this year, but at the beginning of 2022, where we had conversations with people who were heavily active with the NDP, who were raising very real concerns about the internal culture with the NDP. They were raising very real concerns about not being heard, about bullying, about power being consolidated within a very small group of people. We heard those concerns not only from volunteers and staff, but we also heard those concerns from two of their ex-MLAs, and one of those ex-MLAs was also their justice minister for a good chunk of time. When people who are that close to the organization are saying that there is huge problems with the internal culture, how people are treated, how control is consolidated, that is a very real problem. Because here's what effectively happened with that situation. Because of how it was handled, because of how not only volunteers and staffers were treated, but also potential candidates were treated. It's been well identified that in Calgary, the difference that we're talking about in how many votes would have been required to effectively flip the results of the election is about 5,000 votes. When you think about how many staffers were alienated, when you think about how many candidates were alienated, it's not hard to imagine that turning into a couple of hundred, if not a couple of thousand ballots that either stayed home or maybe didn't vote for the NDP. That internal culture piece has been identified over and over and over again. And it came up just a couple of days before the election when it was announced that there is a lawsuit that has been brought forward by a former member of the Disability Committee caucus within the NDP alleging bullying, alleging consolidation of power. This is a problem that the NDP have to deal with because not only is it alienating voters who are hearing about these stories, but it's alienating people who are wanting to do the work for the party. One of the other weaknesses is also, it's supposed to be in the strength column. I read past that. It's their leader, Rachel Notley. There is a cult of personality that exists inside of the NDP. We saw this even with Rachel Notley's concession speech, where with her concession speech, she tried to take responsibility for the loss, the failure to flip over more seats in Calgary. And the audience was like, "Oh, no, it's not you." And she was like, "No, literally, I'm the leader." And they're like, "Oh, no, it's not you." That sort of thing, the idea that Rachel Notley can do no wrong is really problematic because the reality is, love Rachel Notley as much as you do, and I'm sure that there's probably some folks who are going to say some things, and that's okay because we welcome conversation here. This is the second election that Rachel Notley was not able to take things over the top. That's just facts. Now, we can get into the reasons for that, and that's part of what we're trying to do here. But one of the things that a lot of people were speculating on is whether or not Rachel Notley was going to resign on the evening of the election. Now, Rachel Notley's made it very clear she's going to be sticking around. Now, that in and of itself creates some interesting questions because she didn't say, "I'm going to be running in the next election." So this question of what's going to happen with the leadership of the NDP still exists. If you take a look at the vast majority of the campaign signage that we've seen from the NDP for the last two elections, it's very difficult to find, other than lawn signs that are identifying the candidate's name. Overwhelmingly, the amount of signage and the amount of advertising that the NDP deployed over the last two election cycles was, "We're with Rachel, vote for Rachel, you can trust Rachel." And I'm not saying that those things aren't true, but they've built their entire brand around Rachel. So if she does decide that she is going to step down as leader, and it's important to note that part of the NDP's constitution mandates that at their next AGM, which is in just a couple of months, there's going to be, in effect, a confidence vote in her leadership. If for whatever reason Rachel Notley steps away, one of the big questions is, who is the candidate, the potential leadership candidate that is going to be able to go toe to toe with somebody like Danielle Smith. Because here's the problem. And this was another one of the big weaknesses that was identified in the weaknesses category. We only have two left, and then we're going to move on to opportunities. One of the big problems that exists is Danielle Smith is an incredible speaker. Danielle Smith was able to simultaneously spend the entire campaign trash talking the NDP and never sounding like she was trash talking the NDP. She's able to use her tone and her inflection and deliver what many people will refer to as a shit sandwich in such a way that people who are on the fence or are on team UCP are able to hear that and go, oh gosh, she's just so positive. It's going to take somebody of similar ability to be able to match Danielle Smith in the next election. And because this whole piece has been built around Rachel, they haven't cultivated a whole lot of people that can go with a public persona toe to toe with somebody like Danielle Smith. In fact, they've ran away during this election from some of their strongest campaigns. One of the comments that we got was, I didn't see Janice Irwin in a single press conference. There's questions about that. The biggest weakness, though, that was identified was the incredibly bizarre choice to announce during the election and not punt like Danielle Smith did with her controversial policy choices. The 3% increase to the corporate tax rate. Now, if you know economics, if you know about the resource revenue roller coaster, if you know how dependent government programs and the government budget is on being able to deliver the things that the government is relied on to deliver, how reliant those services are on resource revenue, this policy makes perfect sense. But for reasons, I guess, that many people are still trying to find, instead of saying, we're going to come up with a way to make sure that we have a stabilized revenue thing, we're going to engage economists immediately after the election, that's our plan, and then waiting for the price of oil and gas to tumble, as it always does in the province of Alberta, and say, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're gonna increase the corporate tax rates for the biggest companies because we want to make sure that we can continue to provide services. Not only would that be on brand with what the NDP did from 2015 to 2019 with their spending that the UCP loved to hit them over the head with, but as soon as anybody hears the NDP wants to raise taxes, unless they have a basic understanding, which most people don't, of how tax structures work, then raising the the corporate tax rate by 3% is a really big deal, especially given that the UCP demonstrated you can have fun with numbers, because you didn't hear the UCP say, hey, the NDP wants to increase the corporate taxes by 3%. What you heard was the UCP say, the NDP want to increase taxes by 38%. Now, most numbers people, a couple of the accounting people that we spoke to, said you can't do percentages of percentages. You just can't do that because that's an infinite rabbit hole that you can go down and the numbers start to get really disingenuous. But that's exactly what the UCP did. And so they were able to say that the NDP wants to increase the taxes by 38%. And this is the other question. Similar to, did the internal politics, did the internal conflict, did the internal culture alienate somewhere near to 5,000 voters? It probably wasn't 5,000. Like I said earlier, a couple of hundred, maybe 1,000. But do you think people who don't know about tax structure, is it conceivable that this one policy, this 38% tax increase that became part of their platform for reasons that defy any kind of logic or conventional wisdom or strategy or, Can you imagine that it alienated 5,000 Calgary voters in a city of over 1 million people? Could that one policy have alienated more than 5,000 voters? Could that have caused more than 5,000 voters to stay home? Could that have pushed moderates that were on the fence maybe to go to somewhere like the UCP or apparently the Greens? Could that be a reality? And if that question wasn't asked, if that wasn't evaluated before that policy was rolled out, especially given that Danielle Smith demonstrated you absolutely can punt stuff down the road, it presents a very real question as to who brought that forward, who let that go forward. Because it continued on the narrative of the NDP not being able to manage finances at a time where affordability was the foremost issue in this election. What people heard was the NDP wants to raise taxes. Let's move on to opportunities, though, because there are some really great opportunities that the NDP do potentially have. And let's start by looking at the fact that there were some very real victories for the NDP in this election. They didn't form government, and that was their goal. They did pick up 14 new MLAs, and the vast majority of those were in the Calgary area, which is huge because that gives them a significant foothold in Calgary. That gives them the opportunity to be able to speak and learn to speak Calgarian, which is one of the problems that's been identified for months with the NDP. They don't know how to speak Calgarian. The fact that they have 14 new MLAs gives them, and like I said, the majority of them are in Calgary. That gives them a really good opportunity to make sure that the NDP brand in those areas and other areas is front and center of people's consciousness. And those MLAs, all of them being from Calgary, can start to introduce the Calgary vernacular to the greater NDP caucus, which is something that they're going to need to do because anybody who speaks Calgarian would be able to tell you talking about a tax increase of any kind in this election was not the way to go. One of the other big opportunities that the NDP have is in regards to rural Alberta. A lot of people have said that the UCP had a massive head start because the UCP had a lock on rural Alberta. And it doesn't have to be that way. We're going to play a video clip in a little bit that we want to kind of highlight this with. But the animosity that exists between rural Alberta and urban Alberta, the way that urban Albertans, and we've seen it coming out of this election, where people have said, well, whatever happens to rural Alberta now, they deserve it. They voted for it. They get what they get. Does that include the kids? Are we willing to write them off? Because if we do, that only furthers that perception. One of the roles that's missing, and this goes to the voter turnout piece, is a lack of leadership. And one of the big opportunities that the NDP have is to start to show some leadership and to start to reach out more effectively at the same time that they're learning to speak Calgarian. They got to learn how to speak rural. And let's remember, Rachel Notley's from rural. Rachel Notley's from Fairview, Alberta, way north. She grew up speaking rural. She should be able to remember how to do that and re-engage with the rural electorate for as long as she's leader. If that's all the way up to the next election, that's all the way up to the next election. But it gives her the opportunity to be able to do that. And that's a huge opportunity because any inroads that the NDP can make in rural Alberta would be tremendous. One of the other opportunities that the NDP has, it's also going to show up in the threat column in a minute, is the fact there's no other home for progressives right now. It's a two-party system. Danielle Smith has even identified that all of the progressive support coalesced around the NDP. Let's remember that in 2019, the Alberta Party got 90,000 votes. They didn't even get a full percentage point. They got 9% of the popular vote in 2019. 2023, they didn't even make a percentage point. A lot of the people who supported the Alberta Party moved away and went to the NDP. Now, some of that has to do with the fact that the Alberta Party didn't run a full slate of candidates. They did in 2019. But there's been a movement, and there's nobody knows what the Alberta Party stands for. The next closest progressive option is the Greens. That's the reality. And in oil and gas Alberta, maybe in 2027, maybe the Greens pick up a seat or two, but the Greens aren't going to be forming government in any time soon because they'd have to go through the NDP, and it's Alberta. So, there's that. One of the other big opportunities is Smith. We're like 72 hours, 48 hours outside of the election, and Smith's already back to saying dumb stuff. If she continues on this road, she's going to do a great job of alienating a lot of the people who maybe stayed home or who maybe reluctantly voted UCP. And let's remember that in Calgary, a lot of the margins were razor thin. So if Smith continues to Smith, that's a huge opportunity for the NDP. The other opportunity, and again, we've kind of alluded to this already, is a potential leadership race. If Rachel Notley decides to step down, if she decides to pass the torch of leadership on to somebody else, or if she doesn't survive the leadership review, which is ridiculous, she's going to survive the leadership review. But if she doesn't, then the opportunity to have a leadership race is an opportunity for the NDP to rebrand themselves and to give their new leader a new approach. This election, we didn't talk about Jason Kenney. He was the premier for 3.5 years of the last government. He didn't come up at all. So if there is a public perception, which has been identified, that, I just can't vote for Rachel Notley. I can't get there with Rachel Notley. If they introduce somebody new, if they get a new leader, that gives them the opportunity to get rid of all of that, which is a very interesting opportunity. We got to talk about the threats next. So the threats that exist for the NDP that were identified, the UCP potentially gaining strength. If Danielle Smith doesn't Danielle Smith too hard, if she does, as some pundits are predicting, and she moves more to the middle of the road, then what potentially happens is the UCP gains strength. If she doesn't screw up badly, she doesn't push the pension plan really, really hard, if she continues to have these mini legislative sessions and then cuts out a week early and nobody really notices any harm that they're doing, there's a very, very good chance that the UCP could pick up momentum. One of the other big threats that the NDP is going to have to navigate is also one of their opportunities, and it has to do with that progressive coalition. It's important to realize that because the NDP represents the only progressive option for the province of Alberta, that encompasses a real wide gamut of people, a lot of whom don't like each other very much most of the time. This is a brand new coalition of progressives in the province of Alberta, and that also makes it very, very fragile. So that's a really important thing that they have to be aware of. But the biggest threat to the NDP, by far, as we identified in the weaknesses section, is the NDP. Because if they don't address any of these issues, if they don't fix these issues, if they don't address their internal culture, they are only going to continue to alienate more people. They're only going to continue to have these stories dog them, and they're only going to continue developing their policies and their platform inside of this apparently ironclad bubble that they exist in that allowed them to put forward this idea of a 3% or 38% increase in corporate taxes in the middle of an election where the biggest issue was affordability. They have to be willing to reach outside of that bubble, and they have to be willing to engage with some of that wide variety of progressives that have shown up under their tent because there's no other options currently. A couple other things we want to highlight before we open it up to the floor. One of those things is absolutely, we got to talk about Take Back Alberta. Because one of the things that Take Back Alberta has been very clear on is not only are they not going to let up the pressure on the provincial level, but they've been very clear that they're also organizing for the municipal level. We are roughly 2.5 years away from the next round of municipal elections. Take Back Alberta has said that they want to get control of the school boards. They've said that they want to get control of the city councils. And it's really important to understand it's almost impossible to overstate how well organized they are. We've made the comment on the show many times before that Take Back Alberta and David Parker were able to recognize that inside of the whole freedom movement, inside of all of the dissent that came out of the convoy, people were able to connect and network in ways that they had never done before because they didn't have reason to. And all of these fragmented, isolated, more extreme elements of Alberta society were able to go, oh, hey, let's work together. They've had the last 3 years to get really, really good at getting really, really organized. And it's important to say and make it clear, one of their stated goals is to come for the school boards and to come for the city councils. So that's something that everybody needs to be very, very much watching for. One of the other weaknesses that was identified, and this is a bit of a broader conversation, has to do with the media ecosystem that exists in Alberta. One of the big reasons that Danielle Smith didn't really have to campaign negatively, even though she did, but she didn't look like it. One of the reasons why she was able to do that is because there were media proxies that were more than happy to do it for her because that's their ideological bent. I'm talking about the Western Standard. I'm talking about True North, who, out of the election, said, hey, donate to us so that we can continue to do news. True North, the registered immigration charity, who, to my eyes at least, and I'm not a legal scholar or a tax lawyer by any stretch of imagination, appear to be completely abusing their charitable status in order to do news. The main correspondent for True North is David Parker's wife, whose wedding Danielle Smith attended, who has gotten multiple exclusives with Danielle Smith. The affiliation between True North and Danielle Smith really can't be up to any kind of reasonable debate. And we also saw from Take Back Alberta that they were apparently working together to amplify concerns about the electronic tabulators. We're talking about, Kean Bexty. We're talking about the Rebel. Danielle Smith did the year-end interview that was part of what got her into so much hot water, talking about how she was talking to Crown prosecutors all the time. There is a tremendous ecosystem on the right. And we've seen media ecosystem on the right. And we've seen Danielle Smith say on multiple occasions, hey, you know what? What we really need to do is support the new independent media, like the Western Standard, like True North, like the Rebel. She is leaning heavily into supporting these independent media organizations. And no such thing exists on the left in the province of Alberta. There are people who do amazing work, and I'm not minimizing that by any stretch of imagination. You take a look at people like Kim Seaver. Kim Seaver, whose independent reporting has broken more than a few stories. Kim Seaver, who's reliant entirely on donations in order to be able to do the reporting he does. You take a look at organizations like the Sprawl. They're focused almost entirely on municipal politics. But in 2019, they did some incredibly important reporting on the history of Jason Kenney and his history and all the horrible, horrible things that he did in San Francisco. These are the media outlets that should be getting support. But one of the problems that exists is on the right. If you're on the right and you don't like a story that the Western Standard does, but you're a subscriber, you'll go, no big deal. I didn't like that story. I'm just going to put my blinders on and ignore it. Progressives do the exact opposite by and large. If a progressive, air quotes, media outlet does something that progressives, air quotes, don't like, they come with knives out. And that is extremely unhealthy because it doesn't allow that same media ecosystem to grow on the center left. Conservatives are campaigning on destroying legitimate journalism. Pierre Poilievre has talked about defunding the CBC. Danielle Smith and the UCP have made no shortage of comments about how bad the CBC is. They are building their own media ecosystem, and they are trying to destroy legitimate journalism in the process. And the left is too busy canceling each other most of the time, as opposed to supporting the outlets that are trying to move the needle. And that's something that has to change if we ever want to see anything other than blue governments. One other thing that I want to talk about real quick before we open it up to the floor. Danielle Smith is not the endpoint of extremism in Alberta. The Alberta Prosperity Project is not the endpoint of extremism in Alberta. Archer Pawlowski is not the endpoint of extremism in Alberta. They are not as bad as it gets. A lot of people say Danielle Smith is such danger. She's so dangerous. And I agree. I think that in many ways Danielle Smith is. I think that in many ways she's corrosive to democratic norms. But here's the thing that we have to remember about Danielle Smith and the ethics commissioner and everything that happened. The system worked. It didn't necessarily work in the ways that everybody wanted it to. But the ethics commissioner has reserved the right to make recommendations to the Speaker of the House in the next legislative session. The ethics commissioner role in this isn't done, but she absolutely found that Danielle Smith broke the law. It took a little while, but the system worked. And that's something that, quite frankly, should be celebrated, because based on my experiences with the ethics commissioner and the show's experience with the ethics commissioner, we weren't expecting anything. When we raised concerns about the war room, the ethics commissioner responded with, well, that's up to the electorate. When we raised concerns about the masks, the ethics commissioner did an investigation, but because Adriana LaGrange couldn't remember the details, a la Ronald Reagan, there's nothing to be done. So when the NDP requested the ethics commissioner investigation into Smith, we were incredibly cynical. But the system worked. What's more scary than the Danielle Smiths and the Artur Pawlowskis is that there is this enabling that is happening in this province and, quite frankly, in this country, where the rhetoric that is being utilized in order to make people angry by media outlets is enabling this encroaching bigotry. And one only need turn a few pages of a history book to know how bad it can actually get and how bad it actually already is. Let's not forget that in this province, it wasn't just a couple of years ago that two Métis individuals who drove past someone's house were hunted down and shot. Not because they did anything wrong, not because they did anything illegal, but because someone decided that because of how they looked, they must be criminals and should be hunted down. We are seeing a rise of hate crimes in this province. And it's something that we should all be paying attention to. Because the end point of the encroaching bigotry and hatred that is going on in this province is not Artur Pawlowski. It is not Danielle Smith. It is a kid tied to a stake and lit on fire. That's happened. It hasn't happened recently, but that is where hate can take people. And that is why it is incumbent on everyone to be calling out this kind of rhetoric every time we're confronted with it. I'm seeing a lot of people, and I understand why. I get the fear. I do. But I'm seeing a lot of people talking about, you know what? I'm just going to leave Alberta. This is too much for me. I'm just going to leave. I'm just going to say, you know what? I'm done. Not my problem. I'm going to move to BC or Nova Scotia. I get that temptation. But here's the thing that you have to, if you want to count yourself as being a compassionate human being, here's the thing that you have to include in that calculus. There are people who can't. And those people represent some of the most vulnerable that will be experiencing the consequences of this encroaching bigotry and this encroaching hatred. I don't begrudge anyone who has the ability to leave this province right now, because we are absolutely heading into some dark times, and I take nothing away from that. But it's also really important to remember, and this is one of the things that we've tried to explore on this show for the last 2 years, to be able to just up and leave is privilege. And there's a lot of people who don't have it. There's nothing wrong with taking a break. There's nothing wrong with self-care. But there are people who are relying. I can't even say relying. There are people who are hoping that those of us who do have privilege are going to choose to utilize it to defend them. We're going to choose to stand with them. We're going to choose to make as much noise as we can. And we're going to choose to say as loudly and as vigorously as we possibly can, not on my watch. And this is where I want to play one more quick little video before we open it up to the floor. I can see we already have at least one speaker requested. I'm super excited to hear what everybody has to say tonight, but this is a video that I absolutely have to play. On election night, I had the privilege of being on a panel with a podcast called the True North Eager Beaver podcast. And it has the nicest sounding name in the world because one of the hosts is named Douglas, and he is, to my experience, one of the nicest and kindest people that I've ever had the privilege of interacting with. He's just an absolutely amazing human being. He's also a member of the LGBTQ2S+ community. He's also a member of the BIPOC community. And as we were having our conversation throughout the evening, watching the results roll in, it was painfully obvious how concerned and how much this was affecting somebody who would potentially be. He doesn't live in Alberta, so he's okay. But he's concerned about all of the people who are part of his communities who are in Alberta. And it was painfully obvious how much it was affecting him. And what this amazing human being chose to close this show with, his show with, that night, I think are words that every Albertan who has even the slightest ounce of privilege in this province needs to hear. So I'm going to play that video for you, and then we're going to open it up to the floor.
This is not where we want to be. I know that. And I am very, very, very concerned for my brothers and sisters in Alberta. And even for those who voted UCP, because I fear that there are many of them that are going to be surprised with what they get. I think that we will be hearing some, well, I didn't think it would be like that. And we may have to work double time to pay attention to those people when it hits, because they may not be in a good place when that happens. And when that happens, we will have the choice to say, well, see, I told you, and turn our backs. Or to do the hard work of, despite the fact of us telling you, you're not in a good place right now, so I'm going to extend the hand and I'm going to help. And that won't be easy for some of us to do. But when that time comes, we will have to do it. Because the alternative is beneficial to no one. So we accept this result. We don't have to like it. And you know what? If you're discouraged for a day or two, you're guilty of being human. You're guilty of being human. So whatever it is that you have to feel, do feel it. Go through it. Feel it. Feel it all. And if it feels terrible, feel it and remember how that feels. And use that then. Channel it positively as fuel. But as we said, just whatever it is that they have planned that is going to hurt those they consider to be lesser than, and those they are gleeful to refer to as lesser than. Just we have to be the people who will show up. So, whatever you need to do to get yourself to the spot where you are ready to take on the fight when that bell rings, please do it. And if some of you are tired, take a break, hand the baton. We'll run with it for a while until you get back on your feet and you're ready to join the race again. We'll run your leg. But don't leave. Don't leave the public square. They want you to do that. They want you to go away so that they can have all the room. And this is the time to stand ground.
I wouldn't possibly be able to say it any better than that. Douglas is, to me, the picture of grace that I would like to be able to be one day. And the commitment, we've had the conversation here, and the commitment that we're going to make is we are not going anywhere. God willing, we're going to be able to decrease our broadcast frequency a little bit, and hopefully go back to one show a week. But if it's required that we do 2 shows a week, we will be doing 2 shows a week. But we're gonna be here. We're gonna keep trying to advocate for issues that would otherwise fall through the cracks. We're gonna try to do it with humor. We're gonna try to do it with fun. And you better believe we've got us a puppet in the works. Plans are being made. So stick around for that. And with that, I'm going to open it up to the floor. Cassandra has been waiting extraordinarily patiently for quite a little while. So hopefully she's still there, and we'll be able to bring her in. Cassandra,
Hello.
how's it going?
Whoa. Well, you know what? I have to, I don't know whether to thank you or curse you because I had a meltdown after the election and was panicking and was definitely thinking of how can I get the heck out of here? And then I had an epiphany today and took another direction. And you just brought back all the anxiety. That's the last part of it. Anyway, I know.
Sorry.
So but the whole last part of the show so far, I've just been like, okay, I already know this. This is the stuff I'm trying to remind myself I can fight against, and you're just making me feel. And so, but I wanted to before I comment more on that, I just want to say that in the first part of the show, I want to point out something about the NDP. A lot of people a lot of the generation after me and some of my generation, that are, so-called lefties and NDP supporters and stuff, they always like to talk about the left. But here's the thing. The Alberta NDP was a party that was born on the prairies. And if you looked at that party when it was born and who it was born from and the people that we're talking about, they're not quite as left as a lot of people who are left today. They would not think of them that way.
Absolutely. That's one of the concerns that many people raised.
And when people say, oh, we got to get back to their roots, that is our roots. And it's actually, if the party would spend more time talking about, like, especially in Alberta, flying that flag of our prairie roots and what we were born of and that history, because I think that will resonate more with people. Never forget, the guy that started the NDP, he got voted by all Canadians in a largely liberal-esque conservative kind of Canada, got voted the greatest Canadian on a CBC. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but he got voted by Canadians across the country as the greatest Canadian. And that was the guy, Tommy Douglas. That was the very first leader of the NDP party. He was the Labour Party, which I can never remember the full name without the acronym. He came from that, and him and Dave Lewis built a new party off the prairies. That was the NDP that brought us healthcare and all of this, and they're from the prairies, and a lot of farmers and a lot of agricultural people were a part of that movement. Anyway, I wanted to say that, and I wish the NDP would focus on that. And I think this also echoes the whole rural argument. I have pounded my fist, and I've told people, got to focus on rural, strategy rural, because that's the key, not just Calgary.
Yep.
And so that's what I wanted to say about the beginning of the show. And but the other part is like, you're quite right. Like, it is terrifying. Like, I was literally terrified when I woke up in the morning and I had a panic attack. I called my daughter in BC bawling. I'm like, I don't know. I can't afford to live there. I don't know what to do. Blah, 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 blah. Even with all the family support. And I'm like, and then I woke up this morning and I called a couple old bosses of mine, and I'm going to move. I'm just going to move within the province, because if I've been on disability because I was hit by a truck, and it's been tough, but I know that I've got good connections in another part of the province, and I know that I can probably get back to work, and that they'll be accommodating to me as well with my new disabilities, and hopefully I can be a little more affluent, because that's the only way I will be able to stay and not think about where am I going to go. But I'm doing all of this to stay and fight, like you said, like to change the narrative, to switch the narrative and push back on the ground. I'm more of an outside activist. I do my activism outside of party politics for the most part, and you know, that's really important that we do that. And because activists, you know, people like say, oh, protesting does nothing. It's not true. Protests are the people on the ground, and the more of us that they see, that's what puts real pressure on politicians, because when they see big crowds of protesters, they see votes.
Well, just take a look at the curriculum, right? Like
Yeah.
they had their initial rollout of the curriculum that asked kids to identify gravity on a globe and all of the very bad things. And it was only because people showed up by the thousands in a sustained protest online and in person that they eventually went, okay, we're going to go back and fix some things. So protest absolutely does work.
Yeah, I've been a part of protests. I've seen how it can work. I've seen how policies can get changed. I've seen how the way people police can get changed, and you know, like way policing. You know, I was a part of a movement on the downtown east side of Vancouver, and we actually were able to put pressure and change the way policing was done to cause less harm to people. And and it was through protest and activism. And I've seen how laws have been changed from the municipal right up to the federal level, because of, like you said, organized, sustained protest, and not letting up and not giving up. Because even the smallest, a lot of people I hear getting discouraged. It's like, oh, we lost. Well, it's no, actually, you moved the bar this far.
Absolutely.
And it's, you know, they get discouraged because they don't move it all the way. Well, nothing is done all the way the first time. It is incremental and it happens, but it comes through sustained pressure.
The quote that I've been thinking of, especially the last couple of weeks, it may come as a shock. I'm a bit of a Jon Stewart fan, but he recently was doing an interview where he talked about the fact, you know, people say that the arc of the moral arc of history bends towards justice, but the only reason why the moral arc of history bends towards justice is because there are people who are pulling it that way, and
Absolutely.
that's it. That's the ball game.
That's it. That's it. It's like, you know, one of the reasons that, and here's another thing, like people might wonder why all of a sudden, like this right wing, this alt right, actually, extremism and hate has been able to manifest in such a short time. And I have one word, it's COVID. So people, they leveraged the COVID, they leveraged vaccines, they leveraged disinformation about COVID to make people think that their rights were being trampled on.
Yep.
And they didn't care about that stuff. They probably, I bet you a lot of them were probably vaxxed. They were leveraging that to anger. And the reason they got away with it was because the people that would normally be out there fighting against them and outnumbering them were at home isolating and masking and doing all the things that prevented them from going out on the streets and counter protesting and showing them. And you know, and I swear that's a lot to do with what enabled them. And now we don't have COVID restrictions. You know, we don't have any of that to hold us back. And so now's the time to, you know, I know it was kind of hard after being isolated and inactive for so long to get yourself moving, but it's nice. Like you have to get yourself moving. Now's the time.
Yep. Well, I think one of the other things that's really interesting, I meant to throw this graphic up earlier, but I got caught up in my little rant there, one of the other pieces, I think you're absolutely right about COVID, but I think one of the other pieces is the media apparatus that exists on the right, and not just talking about the broadcasts that get done, but also the onslaught and the barrage of mis and disinformation that makes people money. There was Frank Graves, who's the founder of Ecos Research. He just released this a couple of days ago, yesterday. They released it, I think it was out a little while ago. But when you take a look at the correlation between the level of disinformation that people believe and their vote intention, it's stunning. Because when you talk about people who have no major exposure. No, they haven't absorbed any major disinformation. 84% of those people were voting for the NDP. 15% of those people were voting for the UCP. When you juxtapose that with the people who have extremely high levels of exposure to misinformation and disinformation, 10% of people who were in the high exposure to misinformation and disinformation were voting NDP. 88% were voting for the UCP. So there is a very cynical sort of manipulation of people that's being done by people who know that if you say, "Oh, Justin Trudeau's climate police," you can get people to sign up for monthly subscriptions. I had a conversation with somebody today who is a smart person, and they asked me if I'd seen this new thing that was it was an article posted on the World Health Organization website that talked about a correlation between vaccines and multiple sclerosis. And I was like, "What? What are you talking about? I'm going to Google that."
Yeah.
So I Googled it, and like the first 10 results immediately were like, there were 2 subjects in this study. 2 people. Like, correlation does not equal causation, and when you're dealing with such a small sample group, but you have to know that stuff in order to be able to say this is stupid. But he hadn't even gone down the road of doing that googling or that own sort of I don't know if this passes the smell test. He just took it because that's the ecosystem that he exists in, and that's why I believe that it's so important that progressives start to drop the purity tests when it comes to supporting independent center left media or even far left media, um, and getting some of that counter argument
Well,
out there.
I agree with you. I agree with you there. But there's another thing if you want to talk about messaging and communications. What the conservatives are really good at is these short sound bites that get people fired up. And they're not necessarily accurate, or they're accurate, but they're said in a way that it sounds like something else than what it actually is.
Yeah.
And they send those sound bites out because they know it's attention span. And what the NDP has to be doing better with their platform is picking those platforms and writing those in sound bites, like the healthcare and stuff like that. Sound bites that people can pick up quickly, like plain language, short, within that initial highest focused sound bite.
Yeah, it's got to be.
You know,
I I got into a big debate with somebody on the Twitter machine because that's what it's for. Just over the last 24 hours, where I was saying, the failure of the NDP here is it's not that they didn't have good policies; they just did a garbage job of communicating them.
that's it. That is the biggest thing. And the other thing that actually kind of got me was, like, you mentioned early on, like they had a great tax platform of like eliminating small business tax and freezing personal income tax. And they put almost no focus on that, but they did put focus on the corporate tax. And most people, when they hear, all they hear is tax. You can say corporate tax, and they automatically think small
Doesn't matter.
business,
Yep.
individual, that it's all one big thing. And that was a failure in communication, because they should have just not even mentioned that one. They could have had it on their website, whatever, not even mentioned it, and focused on the small business tax and the personal income tax. And if they had done that and put that in sound bites and kept repeating it, that would have gotten people a lot more than, the other one.
The feedback that we got on that piece again was that they should have punted it. They should have waited until. See, the problem is right now Alberta's
Yeah.
flush with cash, and so to say, "Hey, we need to increase the corporate tax rate because we've got all this money," it doesn't make sense to people, especially when you're campaigning. Both parties did this on a very spendy campaign platform. If they had waited until the price of oil went to 50, $60 a barrel for a week and a half, 2 weeks, when they were in
Yep.
government, and they said, "Hey, we got a problem here, everybody. We're dependent on this and it's too low. We don't want to tax you, the public. So instead, we're going to tax the richest of the richest corporations to make sure that we can continue to make sure that you're getting to see a doctor." That's what we're doing here. That's all it is, folks. It's cool. And once people had some skin in the game, once there was some actual jeopardy going on, that would have changed. The people would have accepted that in a way.
If you were going to bring it up at all,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, honestly, like if you were going to focus it, you're right. It had to be focused at the right time, right? Like you have to, like, there's opportunities that are out in the broader conversation in the media and stuff that will get more, like the price of oil and stuff like that, that will get more, that you can leverage to get those points across in a way that people can understand it and swallow it.
Yeah. Anything else you want to throw in there, Cassandra? Because I got.
You know what? I could go on back and forth on this forever, so I will just be quiet now and let somebody else speak.
Cool. Well, if we get through the list and you have anything else that you want to add in, then just tap back in.
Okay.
All right. We're going to go to Tammy next. She's also been waiting patiently. We've got a couple other people that are in the queue, and I'm excited to hear from them. I feel like there's no like hardcore NDP supporters who are listening tonight because nobody's like hitting me with a stick yet. But Tammy, what's going on?
Well, I'm a hardcore NDP supporter, but I'm not going to hit you with a stick. So don't worry about that.
Okay. What's going on tonight? What do you got to add?
Oh, well, I went through a lot of emotions through this election thing. A lot. I get what you're saying. I'm at the point of I don't care about the rules. Mea culpa. And I am a rural, right? I live in Edmonton now only because of my strokes that I had.
Yeah.
And the cancer that I had.
Yeah.
But I was a rural. But I also lived in an area, and it's only 30 miles west of Edmonton, that's horrible. It's Shane, I can never remember his last name. It's
Mr.
one
Getson,
of those.
Netflix and Cheesies.
Yes, Netflix and Cheesies, man. And the people there, I could say in really horrible ways. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
They just don't get it. Now, some of them, I'm going to say, this is going to sound really strange. They're not real rurals. They're not like there are some of the farmer types, but a lot of them are city guys who go out and work in the oil field and they buy themselves a big house and they want land or a trail to ride their trikes on. And trust me, because we had issues with them coming and cutting the wire on our gates. Ooh. So that they could go and use our pastures to ride their trikes, ignoring the fact that they could actually be letting our cattle onto Highway 16.
Yeah, there's like tourist rural, which I think I would probably qualify as now. I mean, I grew up rural, but I feel like I've been out of it for long enough that I mean,
yeah.
If I had to watch somebody throw the chains on a calf to get it out now, I'd probably get a little squirrely. But
yeah, because I've done that. Well, I haven't done the pulling. Normally, I get someone a little stronger than I, but I've been pushing the cow into the maternity pen and pulling up the squeeze, and then helping the person that's pulling the calf, and getting ready. You know what I've done? So when you pull a calf, sometimes you're a med person, so this won't gross you out too much. So when you pull a calf, sometimes what happens is the cow will prolapse.
Yep.
So you pull a calf so hard that basically their uterus comes out.
The insides come out.
Yep. So then you got to call your vet in, and somebody, while the vet is washing the uterus, someone has to hold the uterus up and make sure it doesn't go and touch the ground. Right?
Yep.
I have done that.
I've seen that. I was a kid, so I was just like, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, I have done that prior to my stroke, But
see, that to me is rural, not like oil money buys a trike rural.
But the people around us were oil money rural, right? Like they were people that we were surrounded by subdivisions because everybody around us sold their farms to people who wanted to make subdivisions, and there were subdivisions all around us. But the frustrating thing for me is, with all of this, is these people that are pro private health care and that don't get that part of the reason why we don't have the hospitals in the rural areas anymore are because of the conservative. And I'm using that as a broad term.
Yep.
Not as a small, like they're the ones that basically shut things down, that stopped giving money to run those hospitals, that stopped. And I get really frustrated. Like I did a post where I said, you know what? If Albertan doctors and nurses leave, I support it. I support them going.
And there's a lot that are.
And there is a lot that are. And it's a horrible thing to say, but I'm like, why? It's like being in a bad relationship. Why would you stay someplace where the people you're trying to help act like they hate you? Why?
It's like I said at the opening of the show, like my experience with the healthcare, and it was wild for me because I don't know if I'm like too dense and I just don't notice it when people are being rude or whatever, or if it's by nature of the fact that I'm a not small white guy with a lot of tattoos. But I don't get that many people throwing me all that much static when I'm doing what I do. And it was shocking to me to see how many, like, I cannot get over the fact that there were people like, thank you for making jokes. Thank you for being kind. Thank you for not yelling at me. Like, what? Is that where we are? So like, I can totally understand that my anecdotal experience in the healthcare system as a worker obviously is not shared universally. And I can totally, again, like, this is why I say that I think that it's so important that people listen to what Douglas said and they do the self-care and they take the breaks that they need to take. But I mean, to your point, the thing, the story that I shared on the election night panel, which really just makes me crazy. My wife went for coffee with a friend who's in that same sort of subdivided rural but touristy rural, and there was a story that was shared about being out at a coffee shop, and people were talking about, so who you're going to vote for, and this one guy who's with his kid says, well, I'm voting for conservative, of course, and his kid is LGBTQ2S plus, and the kid goes, Dad, they believe that I shouldn't exist. And his reaction was, but I've always voted conservative. And I'm not super concerned about, there are some people whose minds you're never going to change. That's fine. I accept that. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but I accept that. But the people that I worry about are the kid.
Yep, me too. Me too.
Sorry, I totally took it on a tangent there. What was?
No, like that. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at too. But it's like I can't. How do I like before the election? I was like, if by chance Notley gets in, they have to do the thing of like what Lougheed did,
Yeah.
which was to make sure every little area had their little hospital and it was staffed, and they would have to do that kind of thing again. But now they're just so, I don't know, they don't seem to appreciate that the UCP are never going to fix healthcare. Right? Their idea of fixing healthcare is to make it that only the rich can afford to get decent healthcare. That's their idea of fixing healthcare.
Yeah.
Is that unless you're rich, you're going to have, Band-Aids maybe at the local hospital, maybe. And I had to put a line in the sand. I've literally said, like, I get that we need to stay. And I said, I'll stay until she pushes the Alberta pension plan. But as a single mom who took care of her daughters on her own money with no husband, no partner to put any kind of contributions to keeping us going, I had to be the breadwinner and the mom, and luckily I had my mom to help. But still, like my youngest, she had me. So there wasn't money to put a lot of money into an RSP. And when I got sick, when I had my strokes, the RSP I did have from when I worked for TELUS, it got eaten up because it took so long for me to get CPP and CPPD and AISH. So that money got eaten. Like, it's gone.
I think one of the, and I'm sure that a part of it is because I view everything through the lens of first responder, but I think part of the metaphor that needs to be included is it's like when you're trying to get people out of a building that's on fire. There's a point where you can go, oh, it's on fire. We should do something about that. Why don't you guys throw some water on it and we'll try to get some people out. But there's a point where the building is so consumed that you just can't go back into it. And I think that point's going to vary for different people depending on their circumstances. Obviously, you've called into the show before, and you've had a rough go of things. There's no question about that. And so I think that there's going to be some people who have the resources to stay and try to pull people out of the building and put the building out longer than others. And I don't think that anybody who, if they hit that wall of, I just can't anymore. I'm not calling for anybody to be judged or begrudged for saying like, I just can't. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But for people who have the ability to stay and fight or try to pull people out of the building, I think that if you've got that privilege, you've got to, in my mind, you've got a responsibility to try to use it. Once you've exhausted your privilege, then you've exhausted your privilege. So that's
And even if I'm outside of Alberta, I'm still gonna be at least doing the Twitter machine, as you put it.
And it works. I mean, like,
it does work. It does work.
There were candidates that left the race because of the pressures that were exerted on social media. So as much as everybody likes to say, social media doesn't matter, that is to me a negligent way of looking at it, because it is social media that is weaponizing so many people. And so if you want to be able to address that, you have to play in that arena to some degree. So anything else you want to throw in there, Tammy?
Nope, that was it for tonight. You have a great one, and I'm sorry we didn't win, but you're right. Everybody who said it, we've made significant inroads to getting more NDP seats, but we've got to somehow figure out how to break that wall of the the rurals.
Yep.
Because there are a lot of people out there that are starting to lean that way, but it's how do you get, are we going to have to wait until the really oldsters all die? Or, you know,
I hope
it's a
not.
really horrible thing to say, but
I know some delightful seniors.
yeah, I know some delightful ones too. My mom was scary. I mean, they used to call her Meanie Jeannie
Oh, geez.
because she was a mean lady. But she was also a lady that had gone through the Depression. You know, as a little kid, she left Saskatchewan and moved to Toronto, and she was a housekeeper in a lady's house. She literally, what she slept in was they had a dresser, and the bottom drawer of the dresser rolled out, and there was a mattress in that dresser, and that's where she slept.
That'll harden people.
So, you know, and that was just like she had left Saskatchewan during the dirty 30s and ended up in Ontario. I think it was even Toronto, as somebody's housekeeper. And then she came back and she ended up in Manitoba, which is where she met my dad. And, you know, so she had a tough life, and she was kind of a bit of a legend from where we were out in our rural area, because they called her Mean Jean or Meanie Jeannie, because she was not the nicest person on the planet sometimes. But there was reasons, you know, we knew mom's reasons, and they were what they were. But she was also at least very liberal, and a lot of times she was NDP. So, you know, because she believed in people, she believed in trying to help people, and didn't like what the Conservatives did.
There you go. Thank you so much, Tammy.
You have a good one.
You have a good one as well, and we will hopefully talk soon. I'm going to run through the list just because we have some people who are waiting.
Okay.
So we're going to go to ADC, then we're going to go to Lynn, then we're going to go to Laura, then we're going to go to Ziad. So that's the order. If you can hang out and wait in the line, that would be delightful, because we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna stay for as long as the conversations allow us to. And with that being said, I'm going to bring in ADC. I'm curious. I want to start with, like, what does that even stand for?
Well, Angry Dad Canada.
Okay, there we go.
It was the nickname I was given when I was in commercial radio. They had my kid up there, and the coworkers are like, "Yeah, man, you're just Angry Dad. You're Angry Dad Canada." Okay, cool.
Well, what's going on, Angry Dad?
Well, hey, man, I'm one of those guys in rural. I'm in Lacombe. So I sat and had to explain to my daughter how that person on the blue sign was an awful human being, and the fact that our youngest, who's here right now, and her older sibling are both in the 2S community, and try to explain to her that anything that person has said is not true. And thankfully, our youngest is 11 and understands that, but it still pains me to do that.
I can't imagine.
The point that they got, though, is, I mean, number one, you're correct. I actually took a shot at you on YouTube, and I apologize. But I think we have to stop the infighting. I went after Kenny from 2019. I actually went after him so hard that I got targeted by Elections Alberta and was under investigation, and the whole shooting match. So I actually registered as a political third-party advertiser, but I wasn't an electoral third-party advertiser. So anytime that we would get any momentum on our message, I'd get a letter from Elections Alberta saying, "You're not qualified to do this, so you have to stop." So I was basically blacked out during the by-election for Brian Jean, and then during the leadership debate, or the leadership, the UCP leadership. And then I was given a letter after we started to gain some ground, after Smith was named leader, that as of December 31st, I would need to have electoral third-party advertiser status to continue to do what I do. I said, okay, great, I'll do that. Never got back to me. Now the election's over. I've now applied for the electoral third-party status, and I got the call from them saying, oh yeah, well, we can do that, and we can revise what it was before. So what it was before was under Anger Dead Canada. What it's going to be is going to be the Alberta Accountability Alliance. And what my goal is to bring everyone that's progressive and on the left as that voice, and utilize the game that the UCP play, because all the game is oh, they've got corporate dollars, they can shut you down. They've got this. Once we're registered and following the guidelines, we can run fundraisers, we can run golf tournaments, all these things, and raise money for the Alliance, which will be a group to keep the government accountable. And the goal is to have it be a non-ableist, inclusive group. So anyone who feels that because I'm on AISH or because I'm disabled and I can't do anything, no, you're welcome. You're more than welcome. We want everyone involved. Maybe we want you involved. We want, like you said, this is about getting people together. And if you're great at writing letters to your MLA, I think they're useless in my opinion. But if someone's great on doing that, perfect. You'll be the captain on that. If you want to do the in-person protests, fantastic. I know that with Bill 1, we can't protest without having some sort of regulation. And with the upcoming Gestapo that's going to be put into place, in-person protest is going to be very difficult. So it's about mobilizing people. So that's the goal from my side, is to utilize this. And yes, I'm the one starting this. Yes, I'm the one that's going to be the first whatever, but I don't want to be it. I want it to have a entire input of people, and there's a plan in place to be able to do mutual aid in every one of the electoral ridings. So having captains and co-captains providing mutual aid in those communities that are going to just be decimated from the UCP non-help, the Take Back Alberta people, and then have them get that exposure and be able to build those communities back from the ground, and still be able to have a voice back against the government. And with all that being regulated by Elections Alberta, which is basically using their own tools against them. So that's my goal. That's why I called tonight. I want people to understand that. They can follow me on the ADC thing, or we have the at AB_Polly on Twitter, and you can see the stuff that's being changed to the Alberta Accountability Alliance.
There we go. So you're like trying to be like the anti Take Back Alberta.
Yes. So when people are saying we need to come together, no, we've got something. It's all there. Just join. That's all we're not doing. We know there's certain people that charge memberships and all the other stuff. No, it's 100% transparent. And once we've got the approval from Elections Alberta, I will have their guidelines inside the document of the Mutual Aid Manifesto for Alberta that I've already got as a Google Doc. And then people can see what the plan is and where we can go from there, and who wants to join. It's a way to fight back, and you don't have to be in the province to do it either. So if things are too tough for people and they have to leave, I totally understand. In our circumstance and situation, we are not able to do that. So while I'm here, we're going to fight hard, and we're going to come about as an alliance for accountability.
Very cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I don't know what you said on YouTube, but no worries.
It was the thing about the frustration piece. There is everyone saying that we've only got the two choices: the NDP and the UCP, because it's a duopoly, it's a two-party system, and then the Greens can't get seats because of that. And I think you were just the straw there that broke the camel's back for me. The fact that I'm seeing all the independent media saying, oh, the Greens can't do this or whatever because they don't have. But if we keep saying that, it's never going to happen.
Well, I
So there's
think
got
to
to
be
be a
clear, like let me clarify that. I think that there's definitely room for the Greens to pick up some seats.
yeah,
And I mean, if anybody who's been paying attention to Alberta politics for the last 8 years, if there's any lesson, it's like the most surprising things are not only possible, they're becoming more and more likely. So it's it's my crack at the Greens was not meant to be disrespectful or derisive.
yeah.
I had Jordan on the show, and I would love to see in my perfect world. We would have multiple parties represented in the legislature. I think that would be the best thing for the conversation. But if wishes were horses and all that,
Yeah, 100%.
cool. Okay, well, as long as you weren't making fun of my hat or my shirt, then I'm cool.
Not at all.
Cool. All right. Anything else you wanted to throw in there, man?
No, let's let other people talk.
Okay.
Thanks for the platform, Nate. We'll keep in touch.
Hey, can I just throw one other thing in before you go?
Absolutely.
I don't know if it's worth anything, but there's a lot of people who know that what Ms. Johnson said is absolute garbage. And I hope that your kids know that there are a lot of people in this province who are incensed that that sort of rhetoric is being talked
Yeah.
and thrown about in any way. So I just wanted to say that.
No, I appreciate that. No, 100%. And their dad is the angry dad, and he's the dragon dad, and yeah, and he will speak out. And most people won't. I don't have the tattoos like you, but most people see me as a 6 foot something angry guy who they don't want to mess with. So pretty much when I start to speak up, people will either back down or not listen anymore.
There you go. All right, man. Well, you take care. Have a good night, and you take care of those kids.
You too. Bye bye.
All right, we're going to move on from there. I'm going to double check who's next on my list. We got Lynn coming in. So I am going to tap Lynn in here. And it looks like we might have lost Laura, but that means that Ziad will be up after Lynn. Lynn, what's going on tonight?
Well, hello, Nate from Brian Jean, or as we call him, the BJ country.
I mean, that was. Are you excited to have the next potential leader of the UCP as your MLA?
Absolutely. First of all, I'm like totally pissed off with him, normally. But traveling the highway the last months, I can tell you that there are 3, between the Tim Hortons. Well, there's 3 signs. So there's one downtown, there's one going up the hill, and there's one somewhere else. 3 signs from the Grassland turnoff to Tim Hortons in downtown Fort McMurray, which is almost his line, right?
Yeah.
So he didn't even bother to put up any signs. So that annoys me. But anyway, negativity is gone. Yesterday was the day for negativity.
Yep.
I'm done with it.
Perfect.
So when it comes to the leader, I love Rachel. I do. I grew up in Bruce, Alberta, and my uncle was the one who brought Grant Notley to the rural. And we actually had an MLA out of Vegreville, as hard to believe as that is, but we did. And so I disagree with Tammy when it comes to rural, because I think it takes a grassroots movement. I mean, I was a kid. I don't know how old I was, a teenager maybe. Grant Notley was the biggest, star that I knew. And Tommy Douglas was the hero of our family kind of thing. So I do disagree with her there. I understand that Calgary is important, but rural to me right now is something we need to concentrate on. And I think you have a speaker coming up from the Women Against the UCP, which some lovely woman on this group told me to join. So there's something going on there. when it comes to the TBA, I agree with you that, I mean, I'm 66, but I need to get involved with the school boards, the municipality more, to make sure that these assholes don't get into these areas, because I'm afraid of them. And I'm afraid of them because I asked my husband today, and he said he thinks it was about 10 or 12 years ago. We were at Wandering River, and he came out of the men's washroom and got in the car, and he said, I saw something really disturbing in there. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, the sign on the bathroom stall said, KKK is alive in northern Alberta.
Ooh.
And he was just frightened. And I was like, what do you think that means? And he was like, I don't know, but it was there. And I think that was, we tried to figure it out today, and we think it was about 14 years ago. So this movement of the white supremacists, I don't want to say started, I think it never left.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that 100%. I remember in the 90s, in the I will choose my words carefully here. In the musical circles in which I spent a great deal of time, there was, you know, the people that I hung out with. We had a very, we occasionally crossed paths with white supremacist groups who in the 90s were being very bold in Calgary, and we had a very particular reaction to them. So it's not a new thing by any
No.
stretch of the imagination. It seems like it's being more and more emboldened right now.
Yeah, I think if you Google back to, I don't know whether it was the 30s, the KKK rallies in Edmonton and stuff, but you know, we weren't born then, so we didn't know about any of that. And he just said to me, I remember at the time, he said to me, you don't worry about it. It's like the consort, you know, towards the Saskatchewan border. That's the area. And we don't know who's coming through this line, but they're there. You know, it's TBA is, to me, not that far away.
Yeah.
And when it comes to them, they're the thing that frightens me, of course, because talking to my grandkids who are 13 and 11, and I was trying to explain to my 94-year-old mother last weekend that they don't see color. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, they go to school with kids of all colors. They don't see color. They only see the kids' names. They don't see sex. They only see the child. And they go to a Catholic school. None of that stuff means anything to them. And when Danielle needs to understand that my grandson is 5 years away from voting. And I can tell you right now what he told me this weekend, and it was not for the UCP. So I think somewhat they need to get a grip and understand that people like me who might still vote UCP, which I didn't, of course, but we're going away. And those old white supremacist values are going away too, because I live in Fort McMurray. If I go downtown to Canadian Tire, I can tell you right now that probably between 50 and 60% of the people I see are not white.
I'm conflicted on that one, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I think that you're right in that we are seeing more and more diversity being brought to Alberta, and I think that's a fantastic thing. The flip side of the coin for me though is I always keep going back to the research that Dr. Jared Wesley's doing with the Common Ground initiative thing, and you know we had him on the show a little while ago. I'm hoping to get him on again soon. But he talked about he's done this research piece where he goes out to and does effectively focus groups and says, okay, here's what I want me to do. Draw me an Albertan. What does an Albertan look like? And the number of people who are from those communities that you're talking about who invariably draw a white dude in coveralls with a cowboy hat is heartbreaking, because what that says is the people who are drawing a white dude and who are attaching those words. He's Joe Alberta. He's a farmer. He's Joe Alberta, the white guy. When somebody who's a member of a community that's not middle-aged white guys defines Albertan as something other than them, that's deeply, deeply problematic for me. And I look at folks like Angry Caillou, who, it was only a few years ago that he was working in a white supremacist store selling white
Yes.
supremacist material. He's not that old. He definitely is not looking as young as he used to, but there is still very, very strong undertones of that. The fact that Artur Pawlowski was willing to have in Calgary and Edmonton tiki torch marches just to push people's buttons, and in the process of doing so managed to successfully tokenize some folks. That to me is the lesson that I take. And I remember being in a bar with a band, and this the phrase that we used is wolf pack. This group of
Yep.
white supremacists walked in. One of them was wearing an SS uniform, and I literally had to be physically held back. And it went away for a while. But the trick with these things is that if we forget, if we start to feel like, hey, you know what, maybe the white supremacists aren't being quite as white supremacist-y, and maybe we can take our foot off the gas. I think that's when they take advantage of it. And I take a look at people like Kean Bexty, who are getting a higher and higher he's getting to ask questions of the premier of the province right now,
I know.
and his views are quite clear. That to me says, I hope you're right, but the reality is hate crimes are on the rise in this province.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with you. And I grew up with white supremacists. They were, I could name 4 of them. And we just stayed away from them. Like, everybody in town knew that they were crazy and they had guns in their trucks and whatever. But that's a challenge for me, because I have a lot of teacher friends, grades 2 to 6. So I think Jared is doing a great job, but I'm going to challenge them to ask their classes what an Albertan looks like. And I can almost bet you that they're going to draw someone Indigenous somewhere in their picture.
I'll ask him that when we have him on the show next.
Because when you grow up in Fort McMurray, that's a culture here. We don't hate Indigenous people. We embrace them. And that's taught in our schools, public and Catholic. We have so many different ceremonies, Indigenous days. I'm going to do that. I'm going to ask them, each of them, to ask their classes to draw a picture. And I'm going to get that sent to Jared and see whether it aligns with like a city.
Yeah.
Like,
I think it'd be if they're cute pictures, I'd love to see them. But
I'm going to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good thing. But I'll share the story of the worst compliment that I've ever been given, and then actually,
Okay.
I'll let you finish it. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before I share the worst?
No, you share the worst story. I'm good.
Okay, cool. And then I'll bring Ziad in. But the worst compliment that I've ever been given was I was working on the ambulance one day, and I picked up an Indigenous person who was in, I'll say, medical distress. and they were definitely a little bit agitated. And so I'm doing my whole jokes and humor stuff because that's what I do to diffuse tension in just about every situation. And as we got closer to the place that we were taking them to, they said, I really want to thank you. And I was like, well, I just made some bad jokes and I, poked you with a needle. If you want to thank me for that, you can. And they're like, no, you don't understand. You didn't hit me. And I said, I'm sorry. And they said, the last time I had an interaction with first responders, they hit me. And I just really appreciate that you didn't hit me. And that to me that experience is something that I carry with me all the time, because just because we're not seeing a thing doesn't mean that it's unfortunately not happening. And in the time that I spent out with having the privilege of working out at Six Siga, um, the overt and subtle racism that I saw Indigenous and First Nations people experiencing inside of the healthcare system, I got myself into all kinds of trouble because I was so horrified at how some people were comfortable treating Indigenous and First Nations people. So I think a lot of it depends on the circles that you travel in and the individual communities that exist. Because I know that there are some communities where Indigenous and First Nations people are treated with the same basic humanity than anybody else is, but there's absolutely other communities where that's not the case, unfortunately.
I agree.
So that's the worst compliment I was ever given. And with that, I will say thank you so much, Lynn. And I'm going to add Ziad in now to raise my blood pressure, probably with something. Ziad, what's going on, sir?
Hi, Nate, and hello, gang. Um, I'll talk briefly about the election. A lot of other much better people than me have been analyzing it. And then I would like to talk about the Event Center Arena complex in Stampede Park.
Okay.
The deal that was rammed through, and then a little piece of it was shown to us on April 25th, and then the city and the partners went back into a cone of silence and agreed that they wouldn't talk about it. And I'm going to talk about it if there's some time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on the election, I've sort of take a fatalistic view to this. The NDP did the best they could. The UCP did the best they could. 1 week ago, I had a UCP government run by Danielle Smith running the province, and now I once again have a UCP government run by Danielle Smith running the province. But I think I'm in a better position now, and that's because many of the old guard conservatives who voted for the UCP and have been doing so for 40, 50 years have had this comfort that when they get a bad premier, they get rid of them pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so in the last 10 years, got rid of Kenny before his term was up and got rid of Redford before her very quickly. And so I think there's a sense of confidence, hopefully not overconfidence, by the old guard of the party that if they get a bad premier, they can fix it. Let's just get through the election, get back into power, and then we'll fix this Danielle Smith situation. So, we could have quite a clash between the old guard of the party and Take Back Alberta, essentially where the old guard of the party goes take back the UCP. But I think that's going to be an interesting battle because, 9 more seats on the board, the remaining 9 of the 18 come up for refill this year. And Take Back Alberta took 9 and 9 last year and kind of surprised everyone. So now that they're a known entity and people are paying more attention to them, maybe, like if I compare, he's passed away, but Jim Prentice or Ed Stelmach or Ralph Klein. I mean, I'd rather have them than Danielle Smith. And so hopefully someone like that is able to be installed instead.
Well,
So, they couldn't, sorry, I'll just finish the point. They couldn't get rid of Danielle Smith before the election. It was too late, but they might do so after. Go ahead, Nate.
I was just going to say, I think you might be onto something because I think that there is for sure within some segments of the air quotes conservative pool. I mean, we saw more than a few old school PCs, as well as some other conservative figures, um, come out and swing pretty hard against not just the UCP in some ways, but certainly against Danielle Smith. And I have to tell myself that when we're talking about some of those figures, I don't think that it was purely political posturing in a lot of the cases. I think that there are a lot of people inside of the conservative movement who are they've kind of done a read of the room and they've gone, "What the holy hell is this?" And I don't think that you know they're they're just going to walk away. I think that there's going to be some fascinating. There's certain figures in the realm of conservative politics that I'm going to be watching very closely with a high degree of curiosity, because there's some folks who stepped up in ways that I was not in any way expecting to see, and it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. But go ahead and stress me out about the arena, man.
Okay. I'll just give another sort of bit of potential good news source, and that is the ethics commissioner has still to recommend her sanction against Danielle Smith
I
for breaking the law.
know.
And so that's going to come out once the legislature is back in session. And I was comparing what Ethics Commissioner Mario Dion did when Trudeau got caught putting too much pressure on his Attorney General. And I didn't really see any sanction there other than let's leave it to the party to discipline their leader, as well as let's leave it to the voters to discipline the party. And, although Trudeau had many negatives like blackface and this two ethics violations, the federal conservatives were still unable to knock him off. So I'm thinking the sanction from this provincial ethics commissioner against Danielle Smith putting too much pressure on her attorney general may not be that much in terms of punishment coming from the ethics commissioner, but I think it'll give the opportunity for caucus to get rid of her. And caucus might not want to leave this to the party because the party's been overrun by Take Back Alberta. So caucus might just decide we'll use the ethics commissioner's report to get rid of Danielle Smith ourselves, because if we try and leave it to another leadership review, the votes may not be there because of Take Back Alberta's stridence. And related to that, Pawlowski's coming up on his sentencing, and it could be quite serious.
It's going to be. I mean, he walked out of that courtroom and he
Yeah.
said, "I would do nothing different." After he had been found guilty. So there's no way that the judge doesn't take that into account when he did it on a video live stream immediately after being found guilty.
Although the quote pastor who was the warm-up act for him on the legislature steps, I guess about a week ago, said that was a sermon, that literally his words were, "This was a sermon being given in the saloon." I'm going, okay, I've heard a sermon on the mount, but sermon in the saloon? Yeah, that's a new one. But yeah, so essentially his defense might be that it was free speech under religious
Oh, there's no
protection.
defense. It's done. He's guilty.
No, he's making a charter. He's making a
Nope, they're
he's
not,
making an
because they stayed
application
that.
under the charter.
They stayed that. So the prosecutor actually came forward a little while ago and said, "You know what? We would like to stay the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act charge. We're going to stay that one. We've got our two guilty verdicts on the other two. We're going to leave those." And it was the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act one that Pawlowski was doing the charter challenge on. So the Crown Prosecutor's Office has effectively negated the charter challenge that Pawlowski was saying he was going to bring forward, which is why the sentencing is going ahead with the other two, because there were 3 charges in total.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And
So
public mischief is the more serious offense.
Yeah, there's no the arguments are done. It's just, what does the judge do for sentencing now? And because he's been so egregious, and he has publicly expressed not even just not remorse, but a willful desire to do it again. I think the sentence that's going to come down is actually going to be a little bit like, "Oh, you got spanked."
Yeah. Okay.
I'm no legal mind, but Yeah, no, the Crown prosecutor requested that the judge stay the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act charges, and so it's literally, it's just we're just hanging on for the end credit scene now, man.
Okay. Well, if the judge spanks him hard for the end credit scene, it'll just contrast the difference between which prime minister or first minister did the worst interference. So Justin Trudeau interfered with the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin, but SNC-Lavalin has billions of dollars of revenue in Canada, hundreds of millions in export revenue, and thousands of employees, including in Alberta. So Trudeau can say, "Well, I did my pressure on the AG in order to allow SNC-Lavalin to survive and to still bid on government contracts, because they couldn't do that if they got convicted." But Daniel Smith, yeah, I pressed on my AG for Arthur Pawlowski, and he doesn't love me so much anymore because he stood on the legislature steps and defecated all over me.
Yep.
So, in a symbolic sense. Okay, let's get to the arena. Speaking of defecation, we got a glimpse of the report council got from administration that led to council voting 15-0 in favor of this arena deal and then locking the cone of silence back down again. And that report itself is deceptive. And I discovered some things comparing the report to the city website FAQ that came up in the weeks after the report came out. And I've got a thread on Twitter that's pinned to my profile. But some of the most highlights of that, or the most egregious parts of that, is the city says that the total capital it's putting in is $537 million. So just for a recap, it's a $1.2 billion deal. CSEC is putting in $40 million up front, or about 3%, but is also getting a $316 million loan from the city, which, if they pay it off over time, works out to about 29% from CSEC and 71% from taxpayers. For this $1.2 billion project that has $250 million or so of infrastructure improvements to roads and underpasses around the arena. So the city is saying, hey, no problem, because our sources of funding are the $295 million that's previously approved, and then $207 million or so of additional cash, and a little bit more and a little bit here. But the city is saying they only have to put in $537 million. And what they're neglecting to tell you about is that in order for CSEC to only get away with a $40 million down payment, the city is fronting CSEC with another $316 million and is lending it to them for 35 years to pay back at a 5% interest rate. So one has to wonder, well, I've speculated, that the city is getting this $853 million from the Fiscal Stability Reserve. And that is a secret slush fund that the city has been building up since 2009. And they're currently building it up by $100 million a year of essentially overtaxing and under-delivering. It's up to $853 million worth now. And our city council, without public consultation, with a bare minimum of communication with the public, essentially it's just a one-way announcement saying, here it is, and now because of the privacy, we have to keep it quiet. Our city council has repeatedly dipped into this fiscal stability reserve as a secret slush fund for pet projects that enrich billionaires at the expense of regular taxpayers like you and me. So, it's at $853 million now, after $400 million or so was carved out for the major capital project reserve. And that's the reserve that was supposed to have $275 million for the arena. And now they're taking $275 from that, plus hundreds and hundreds, $500 million or more, $600 million more, in order to get $853 million up front to do the city's share of this project. So I'm very displeased with our city administration's report to city council and city councillors' particularly those on the Arena Committee or the Event Center Committee who have had the opportunity to understand the deal as it developed before it got presented to council. I'm very disappointed in them transferring hundreds of $1 millions of cash from taxpayers to the CSEC billionaires in this very slimy way, with a very deceptive report and with deceptive descriptions by Kara of what the options are, and just a deceptive avoidance of describing what the actual elements of the event center block or the arena complex will be on that big space, that big rectangular space butting up against 12th Avenue, between like 4th Street and roughly 6th Street Southeast.
Ziad, I'm gonna pause you for a second here
Yeah.
because I have a feeling things are about to get a little bit spicy. We have another requested speaker, and this is interesting because I was actually looking at the possibility of this week, now that I'm not stuck with an arrow in my chest anymore, of reaching out to this individual to have them on the show, and they're looking like they want to tag in. So this could get. I have a feeling we're about to hear some very interesting things, and I'm going to welcome Mr. Jeromy Farkas onto the breakdown tonight, it looks like. Jeromy, how are you doing tonight?
Oh, by all means.
Hey, I just want to put up my hand and say thanks to the previous speaker. I saw the Twitter thread and I just really appreciate how you summarized everything. So thanks.
Oh, well, that was short and sweet. That was way less spicy than I thought it was going to be. All right, Ziad, well, you can pick up the ball again, but I'll say, Jeromy, look for a DM from us because I'm hoping that we'll be able to get you on the show and have a longer form conversation. But I'm going to give the mic back to Ziad. So there you go, Ziad. You got a thumbs up from a former city councilor and a former mayoral candidate. And by the way, I'll just say it because he raised his hand and said, when I was talking earlier about conservatives who I was very surprised, very intrigued, and quite frankly impressed with, I mean, Mr. Farkas is pretty high on that list. So that's one of the reasons why I'm hoping that we'll be able to chat later on. But Ziad, finish up your thoughts, my man.
Yeah, I'm quite impressed with Jeromy as well. If you don't mind me using your first name, please feel free to call me Ziad. Your experience on city council and your willingness to take heat for digging through the numbers and saying what's really going on, I respect you for that, and I'm doing a bit of that myself with this arena deal. So I talked a little bit about how the city is using what should be an operating reserve as opposed to a capital reserve, and an operating reserve, the rainy day fund, to guide us through periods when city revenue is going to be lower, like during a pandemic or during an oil price shock. And what they're really using it for is pet projects of hundreds of millions of dollars of transfers to billionaires. And if you look at this FSR and it's combined with the budget savings account, we've got city administration squeezing out pennies and nickels, like a couple million there, 3 million there, in order to try and generate savings. And then council comes in and, under the cover of secrecy, hands off hundreds of millions of dollars. It's just disgusting. I think in general, Calgarians just don't understand how different this deal is from the past one. The past one was 50-50 on a $550 million arena that kind of grew to 600. It was still 50-50. And it fell apart when CSEC wouldn't want to pay $20 million more than 50-50. This deal, after 35 years of CSEC taking 35 years to pay back, works out to $29.71 of a $1.2 billion project. And now I want to come to the revenue side. There's much more revenue in this deal than we know. And a lot of the revenue aspects of the project were deliberately left out of the city report. So one of them, and so Jeromy, I have a question to you regarding the corner property, the future redevelopment property that looks like a hotel there. But I'm just going to do the easier one first. It's not just the arena. It's not just all the income from the arena, naming rights, advertising, tickets, merchandise, food and beverage, all that stuff. It's also, there's a parkade there on the property. So the arena's kind of right up against 12th Avenue. And then to the right of it is going to be a parkade. Well, that parkade is also part of the 2971 split between CSEC and taxpayers, but CSEC gets all of the revenue from it. And the city doesn't even get property tax. So as it is, we have the arena, all of the arena revenue, the city's getting zero of it, despite putting in taxpayers overall, putting in 71%. And CSEC is putting in 29%, and they're getting 100% of the revenues, and they're not even paying property tax. So if I'm a real estate developer, I'm going to go to the city and go, hey, city, I'm going to build a parkade and connect it to the new arena and connect it to BMO Center by a plus 15. And I'm going to build that parkade, and I'm going to put 29% of the money in, and you're going to put the rest in, and you're going to own the land, and you're going to charge me no property tax for it. Okay? So, it's one thing, like I've got friends that love the Flames and were comfortable with the city providing the land for free and 50-50 on the construction cost. And if it's a $600 million arena grown to an $800 million arena, they were still okay with it. But when I talked to them about, we're still getting zero of the revenue, we're getting none of the revenue we got in the previous deal. And the split is 2971. And now there are these other properties on the lot that explicitly in the language on the city website are all the revenues go to CSEC. So there's this other property on the lot that's on the northeast corner of the lot. And on the city website, there's an image of it. And it looks like a high-rise tower on the corner there that's connected to the arena and connected to the parkade. And it's called Future Redevelopment Site. And I look at that and I go, that's the hotel. That's the hotel connected to the arena and to the parkade, just like the Skydome Hotel in Toronto. And it's an even better deal than Edmonton, because in Edmonton, the Marriott in the Ice District is only connected to the arena through that swooshy plus 15. At Skydome, the hotel is so connected to the arena that you've got parts of the hotel that overlook the playing field, the baseball diamond. So here, this hotel, it could be a $500 million hotel. And because it's on the Arena Center block, the city gets none of the revenues. So again, I'm a hotel developer. I go to the city and go, yeah, I want to build a hotel and connect it to the arena and the BMO Center. I'll pay for all the construction. I'll do 100% of the construction. But I get all the revenues. You provide the land for free. And you don't charge me property tax. Where do you get a deal like that? So it's one thing to be a fan of the Flames. It's one thing to want the Flames to be in town, but how much are we giving? Now, the last part of the how much are we giving are the land options. So there's 4 bits of land that are in the land options, and one of them is this land in the corner of the Arena Center block, Event Center block. So, Jeromy, I just wanted to ask you, what's your understanding of this lot on the corner? Because it seems to be both. On the one hand, it's something for which CSEC has an option, exclusive option, but on the other hand, it's on the 10 acres of Event Center block that's supposed to be city-owned and for which CSEC gets all the revenue. So what's your understanding of that corner, if you know?
I got to be careful because I probably know more than what is public, but I don't have all of the. I'm not given the information on what this new deal is, but I think based on what somebody could read on the website right now, it's part of that event center block, and everything goes to CSEC. And like a big issue is people assume that us, like the city taxpayers, owning the arena is an advantage. No, it's actually a downside because we don't collect property taxes about it. We have to maintain it. We have to probably be fighting again in 35 years when CSEC wants a new building again, and we're on the hook for dealing with this old decrepit building in 35 years. We're also on the hook for the flood portion of the insurance, which means as the owners, we have to self-insure, which is a fancy way of saying that in the event of another flood, this new building, we owe the Flames a brand new building. That's a catastrophic level of risk in my view, and especially given that the new site is just as flood prone, if not more flood prone than before. And CSAC as well, like I think you're charitable by talking about the overall like maybe 30-70 split, but it's 4% of the revenue that the Flames are putting in, or rather it's 4% of the upfront cost, and they're receiving 100% of the revenue, including things like all the tickets, naming rights. And, Edmonton's deal was a real stinker, but at least in Edmonton, taxpayers, I think, are getting something like, I think it's 10 or 11% ticket charge. That's one thing. And we're also giving up the naming rights here, which is absolutely bonkers to me, because I'm not saying they're comparable markets, but a few years ago, Scotiabank paid $800 million for the Toronto rink. And even if the value of this new rink in Calgary is maybe half of that, that's a huge amount of money that we're leaving on the table. And it's good that you mentioned the land, because the arena is only like 1.2 billion, but the value of the build out, the development options, as well as the foregone property tax, we're talking about like billions and billions and billions of dollars. So it's a bit disappointing to me. And again, like, obviously this is personal, but and it's not sour grapes, like, to be clear, my message on this is that we have to support our mayor. We have to support our council, because that's the only way that we can actually get them to revise this deal. It would be easy just to kind of shit on them, but I think in hindsight, the only reason that we got that 50-50 arrangement is that Mayor Nenshi campaigned on this. He had the popular support going in, so that the Flames knew that he wasn't bullshitting. And my fear, though, is that Mayor Gondek and our council are just like so desperate for a win that they did anything to get a deal, any deal at any cost. And it is my view that, given how close the various Calgary ridings were, that our council, their implicit or explicit endorsement of the UCP, the timing of the campaign stunt, I think it made the difference between a UCP and an NDP government. And frankly, that's quite disappointing, because obviously during the mayoral election, Jyoti and I were on the stage, and she pretty much campaigned on this basis of standing up against the UCP. And it's just, if there was ever a time and a moment that we needed a strong mayor like Nenshi to advocate for us, it would have been in that moment. And I had actually sent a message to Ned and said, fuck me. And in the moment, I did not appreciate you nearly as much as I should have in terms of the quality of the deal that we got. Man, like I thought what we agreed to years ago was a terrible deal, but fuck, I just didn't have the imagination to know how god awful it could be. So yeah, that's it for me.
Cool. Thanks,
I just
Jeremy.
wanted to give an idea. Sorry, Nate, did I continue?
No, I was just saying that was a whole lot right there, and I was just saying thank you for him being willing to weigh in with that. But
I just want to, like, not to like shit on the council, but like, man, I don't know if you saw any of the engagements I had with, I think, Councillor Craw or Penner. It's like I'm just hoping there's more to this. Like, I'm just waiting for maybe there's some silver lining somehow, but it's just really bizarre to me that the more like progressive councillors are the one who are the most like full throated in their support. Like,
I think
it's really bizarre to me.
It's going to make for, like, unless you're 100% right, and there is some sort of secret silver lining that's going on, it's going to make for a fascinating municipal election in about 2.5 years, because it is such a about face from the stated positions of so many of those people who campaigned on it. I have so many questions, and that's one of the reasons why I appreciate what Ziad you've been doing and you've been talking about, because you're very good at finding these things, man.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm a bit of a digger, and it aligns with my work experience of doing due diligence on deals. And so this is kind of my sweet spot. I just wanted to give people an idea of how much revenue the city is leaving on the table by allowing CSEC to have 100% of the revenue, despite only putting in 29% eventually, after 35 years, of the capital. In the 2019 deal, the city was supposed to get a 2% ticket tax, and that ticket tax over 35 years was estimated to generate 155 million. So you divide that by 2%, and you get $7.75 billion of revenue that CSEC is getting just from tickets, not advertising, not naming rights, not food and beverage, not merchandise, not broadcasting, just from tickets. $7.75 billion CSEC is getting from the old $600 million arena. Now, this is a much bigger arena with a practice rink. So if the Flames play on a Thursday night and then have a road game on a Saturday, they can rent out the main arena on a Friday because they don't need that to practice. They're going to practice on their practice rink that the taxpayers are paying 71% for. So that's just an idea of one revenue stream. And then you look at not just the other arena streams, but the parkade stream and the hotel stream. And yeah, it's criminal what a giveaway this is of public assets like land and like $850 million of reserves for zero revenue. There's one other major piece of this, and that's the right of first refusal over the Victoria Park Transit Center, or the bus barns in Victoria Park. So 1/3 of the city's buses are dispatched from there. And we already knew that this transit center was an issue with the Green Line, because if you have the Green Line coming up through Inglewood and then coming into just north of Stampede Park, it has to go through the Victoria Park Transit Center. So we know the transit center is going to get removed, and the LRT line for the Green Line is going to come straight through that area, straight through, McDonald Avenue, and then I think it's 11th Avenue or 10th Avenue coming across there. So that is land just about on the corner of where Elbow meets the Bow. It's just across the railroad tracks from Fort Calgary. So that's awesome land for a condo development. And the city has given CSEC the right of first offer on that land. So the right of first offer is different than like a right of first refusal, like a typical option that a potential buyer gets. The right of first offer is as if you're a tenant in the building. And to prevent the landlord from selling your building out from underneath you, your lease includes a right of first offer. Now, you pay a bit more for that lease, and landlords are happy to put those terms in if they think they have a good tenant. Because as a tenant, you're protected from your landlord selling the building out from under you. You have the right of first offer. If your first offer is reasonable, then the landlord has to accept it and sell the building to you. So this is what the city has granted for the Victoria Park bus barns to CSEC. But CSEC isn't a tenant there. So why do they get the rights of a tenant that are paid for in a lease for land that they don't occupy, for a building they're not a tenant in? It was Evan, I forget his last name, but he was a pretty sharp counselor on the last term.
Evan Spencer?
Evan, sorry?
Spencer?
Evan Spencer. Yeah, he called the Victoria Park bus barns the jewel in the crown. And in the last deal, the 2019 deal, he was ticked that this option is included amongst the two options to CSEC. Now CSEC has 4 options, so 3 bits of land right around the arena, and then that one corner option, which looks like the city's going to have to buy it, own the land, and then wait for CSEC to exercise the option to build likely a Marriott hotel there too, just like in Toronto and Edmonton. And then there's the option for this condo land. And I'm ticked with Councillor Jen Kalokara that says those options have to be there for CSEC to get a chance to buy into these land options, into these properties. He's claiming that CSEC would be locked out of these any sales of this land if the city doesn't give them an option. And it's backwards.
How would
By
they be
giving
locked out?
CSEC an exclusive option, you're eliminating any other competition.
Yeah, like how would they possibly be locked out? Like, I don't know. My experience with real estate is the person who brings the most money usually gets it. So
Yeah. And that's the way market value is defined, right? So Kara is saying, oh, don't worry, we're getting market value. I'm going, the only way to determine you're going to get market value is by having it up for auction and letting everybody bid. So all the other property developers that could do these buildings in Calgary, and from very small ones kind of around the arena to this huge one, which would be the Victoria Park bus barn land, they're all locked out. They don't get a chance to bid on it. And there's even a famous case in Alberta where a landlord didn't accept the first offer from the tenant, and the tenant sued. So, the city is going to be fairly soft on CSEC in CSEC's offer on the bus barn land. It could be much lower than market, but the city isn't going to worry about litigation against the Flames owners. So I'm just looking at this. All the Flames owners have, all CSEC has really basically is where the team plays. So because they're dangling, leaving the Flames in Calgary for 35 more years, they're getting everything from City Council. Like free land, 71% of the arena, a parkade, a hotel, options on little land around that would be great for bars, restaurants, liquor stores, and then the jewel in the crown, where the Victoria Park bus barns are, right on the Elbow River across from Fort Calgary. And for that, for keeping the Flames here? Like, where is CSEC going to go? The NHL is 28 teams? And the good markets are gone. Arizona is struggling again. Florida and other teams, Sunbelt teams, are struggling. So where are they going to go? Like, the Flames have been here for decades. They've built up a loyal customer base, a season ticket base, advertisers, sponsors. They know the market well. They've got city politicians wearing their jerseys at civic events. People are happy to wear a Flames jersey around Calgary. Where are they going to develop that kind of customer loyalty and a revenue base from advertisers and sponsors? And where are they going to get a city council this complicit and a provincial government willing to throw money at them, where the premier used to work for the majority owner of the CSEC? So, like this, there's so much fear that our city has that, oh, the Flames will leave, that they're giving way more to CSEC's owners than they should. They're giving away generational wealth. Like, this land only goes once. And you look at the four owners of CSEC, and the city is taking money and assets from taxpayers and handing it and the revenues to them for nothing. And creating generational wealth. Like, these four guys will be wealthy for generations as a result of this deal. And it's all because of this council. Like, the only return in the deal that the city says is occurring is $17 million a year, and they're calling it a lease payment. So they're saying all of the revenues in the event center block, including arena, the beer gardens, the covered cocktail lounge or reception area, essentially, the parkade, the hotel, all of that is CSEC's in exchange for the $17 million a year lease payment. But it's not a lease payment. The $17 million a year is CSEC paying back the $316 million loan at 5%. It's the mortgage payment. So all CSEC is doing is repaying the loan, yet the city administration's report to council, and therefore to us in the public, finally, when it gets released, is, oh, we're getting $17 million a year lease income. No, we're not. All they're doing is paying back the loan. They get all this for nothing, for free. So, yeah, I appreciate what Jeromy says. I appreciate his experience on council, where maybe we have to support the councillors and maybe we have to show the councillors where they've been misled by administration. Because, I can't believe a 15-0 vote. I thought there were better councillors there, but I think they just had no time to look at the deal. There was a gun to their head that, oh, we got to announce this before the writ is dropped, otherwise the provincial government doesn't exist. We've got Councillor Cara making it look like, we took care of we took advantage of the desperate provincial government, when really it's the people of Calgary who've been taken advantage of by their government.
The one silver lining to me having to go through the whole pneumonia thing is that I got consistently reminded that my blood pressure was doing great. And you come with this, Ziad.
I should talk to your doctor before I come on your show
You really
because I do
should.
this from time to time.
I mean, I think it would be helpful because
I think it should be. I should change my name to Ziad Fazel. So you well, no, when you see my name, it's like, okay, put in the statins, get the vasodilators,
there we go.
because he's
Oh
gonna talk.
man, that's a lot. I think there's going to be some very interesting conversations that come out of this episode. Thank you so much for that, man. Anything else you wanted to throw in before we wrap things up? Because I put a hard limit of 11. We don't have anybody else in the speaker queue, so I'll give you the last word, and then I'll do the obligatory wrap up.
I don't have anything to say. I'll just leave the rest of my notional time if Jeromy has any questions or any advice to give.
Oh boy.
There we go. The floor is yours, Mr. Farkas.
I don't know. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, I'll put you on the spot here. If I send you a DM, do you think we can set up a conversation in a week or two?
Oh yeah, sure.
Because I got a list of things that I would like to ask you about.
Well, we got 3 minutes.
Yeah, no, I'll send you a DM so that we can set up a whole separate conversation. But yeah, no, I'm super excited for that. Thank you for saying yes.
Yeah, one thing I'd return to is Take Back Alberta. It's really boggled my mind how like sort of hiding in plain sight the organization has been, especially given some, I'm going to be charitable and say some really wacky views from some of their organizers. Like, and for me, like I'm quite weirded out in terms of some of the framing, like just as if like elections are like battles between the anti-humans and the pro-humans, and framing like a political adversaries as diseases upon the land, and like it's just like it's pretty like I wish that I could come up with a better word than wacky or fucked up, but stuff like this, like I spent a lot of time down south, like crisscrossing red and states and blue states during the January 6 hearings, and you know, it just it disturbs me to see like modern conservatives looking at what's happening in the United States as if it were some kind of like instruction manual instead of like a cautionary tale. And even just like the hero worship of DeSantis, like with the don't say gay legislation, the banning books, like, you know, I don't even actually think like this is like these are conservative values. Like there's many people out there who think like the UCP has taken like a hard right turn, but like, I don't know, some of this bullshit, like, I don't know, like boycotting the poppy and Remembrance Day and disrespecting our veterans. Like, man, it was just like last month that I thought us conservatives are like for the armed forces and like respecting our veterans. So like, it's just, it's a bit of a head scratcher. But the issue though, I think, is that given the low margin of victory for Danielle Smith, I think she's in the best possible position she could have ever dreamed for. So like when you look at, I think it's the 49 seats, at least 35, maybe 40 have like direct TBA connections. So she's in a really strong position to be able to hold on to that leadership. And it's not like a caucus can revolt and get rid of a premier. The rules are pretty strict in terms of the UCP board themselves having control over the leadership review rules and stuff like that. So I think just given the result and that there aren't many Calgary urban MLAs, and even the ones that are, like in say Calgary Fish Creek, Calgary Lougheed, have direct TBA connections, I think that her own personal leadership position is really strong. So if there's going to be any kind of challenge to her leadership, it's because she's not sort of obeying the TBA directives enough. Like she's not implementing things like the purported changes to the human rights code and stuff like that. So I get that there's an eternal optimism out there in terms of, well, maybe there's some moderates within the caucus who will push back if she's seen to go in a more extreme direction. But if anything, I think the challenge will come from her right. And I put right in air quotes because I don't really even understand where some of these individuals are coming from, because I don't think these personally are conservative values per se.
No, I would agree with you 100% on that. It's going to be, I mean, the poppy thing, that was like, I'm sorry, but if you think Remembrance Day is about you like that, you have missed the entire plot. It was so beyond me that she would be like, they ruined Remembrance Day for you. Like, I, yeah, I did a whole thing on that a couple of shows ago, and I got very, very angry. So I'm going to try to not do that tonight. But I mean, the stunning thing to me about TBA is the fact that like you said, they're so open about it. Like David Parker, completely comfortable posting about the tabulators, and how he and his wife were working together to get this narrative out there, using True North. That was just like you're literally just saying it out loud. This is crazy. I don't even know what to do with this. So yeah, I hear you. I see that Cassandra's put her hand back up, so I'm going to come back to her, and then I'm going to do the wrap up because I did promise her that if she had anything else to add at the end, I would give her the end. So Cassandra, what's your final thoughts there?
I wanted to, first of all, I was going to lead back into what Lynn was saying. In 1989, I was in my 20s. I was young. I'm the perfect, at the time, not anymore, perfect blue-eyed, blonde, German-looking woman. And I was living in Red Deer, and I had to walk across the highway to where I worked, and my apartment was behind this hotel, and the hotel had a sign that said it was the home of the Alberta Texas Longhorn Association. And then when you kept walking to the highway, there was a telephone pole, and on that telephone pole, the KKK would post notices of their meetings publicly on a telephone pole on the side of the highway. And that was not 89, that was 1990. So they are here, and some people are giving them a license to be a lot louder. But that, I don't want to end with that. What I want to end with is I want to just say thank you to Jeromy. Like, Jeromy put out a tweet that where he was basically talking about, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the words, basically running his campaign, he was told to hide who he was and that he was done hiding who he was. And I wanted to thank him for being courageous and standing up and saying, I'm not doing that anymore. And I also want to say thank you for the endorsements that you gave in the campaign. Both those things, you gave a lot of people a lot of hope, and I'm really proud of you, even though I don't know you and you don't know me. I'm just so proud of you, and thank you.
That's a good way to end it. And yeah, no, I'm in I'm trying really hard not to say too much, because now that Mr. Farkas has said yes to a further conversation, I'm going to try to save some stuff. But yeah, I'm very, very excited for that conversation. And with all of that said, I think we've cleared out the speakers list. It's after 11. We've done like another Lord of the Rings episode. So for everybody who's been listening live tonight, I want to say a big thank you for hanging around. I want to say a huge thank you for all of the speakers tonight. And as always, a huge thank you to our chat. Was super busy tonight, and most people were super cool, which is super awesome. I think we may have managed to weed out the vast majority of the Take Back Alberta trolls that were hanging out for a while. So that's kind of cool. We're going to be doing another live show on Sunday. And then we're going to be trying to go back to the format of live shows on Sundays, and then we're going to air our interviews on Wednesday evenings, accessible to our Patreon folks beforehand. And we've got a couple of really, I'm very excited about these conversations. Those conversations will, of course, be posted. Y'all know what's coming next in our Patreon page. So if you appreciate the kind of content, it's been a couple weeks because of the arrow in the chest, but I'll get my riff back in just a second here. If you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would really appreciate it if you are able to, if you thought about supporting us at our Patreon site at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a cup of coffee a month, you get early access to all of our interviews, and you get the warm, fuzzy feeling that comes from knowing that you're supporting us, and that there are certain politicians who would be apoplectic if you told them that you were supporting us. You can tweet at them, if you're not blocked by the premier of the province, like half the province is. But she's got a bunch of new MLAs who probably haven't blocked everybody yet, so you can tweet at them too. It'll be good fun. But you can sign up for that at our, again, www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. I want to say a big thank you for everybody with your patience. I know that our programming got a little bit interrupted with the health stuffs, but I'm back. 3-hour show. I'm back at Fight and Wait, and I'm here for it. So look for the next live show on Sunday. And we're recording a couple of those interviews this weekend, and once they're in the bag, then maybe we'll give some hints about who we're going to be talking to, because it's going to be fun. In the meantime, and in between time, I want to go back to the words that Douglas had earlier. I'm not going to play the whole video again, but again, it's that whole idea of, it's so easy to get discouraged, and it's so easy to want to check out. But that's what the people who are going to be doing the bad things, the people who are doing the bad things, that's what they want. They want to be the loudest voices in the room. And as long as you can be, the best thing that you can do, not only for the province, but for the people who are the most vulnerable and who are going to be targeted and who are already being targeted, the best thing that you can do is show up when you can and be as loud as you can when you do, because we know that that works. So it's critically important. And as we were talking earlier in the show about the radicalization piece and the amount of misinformation and disinformation that's out there, I just want to say again, if you see us sharing anything or saying anything that's false, that's demonstrably false, please let us know. That's one of the reasons why these open mics at the end of the show, for the last half of the show, are so important, because we want to make sure that if we are saying anything that's not right, that we can be corrected on that. We don't want to be part of that misinformation, disinformation mess. But we also have to be able to have conversations with folks who have fallen prey to that. And that has to be in that compassionate way that Douglas talked about in that video clip that I played, because you have to be able to say, as hard as it is, as it's so easy to give into the anger and say, you know what? No, screw you. But when people have that moment of realization, oh, maybe I did a big thing badly here, maybe I helped do a big thing badly here, that's when it's so important that we're willing to show them the better nature of who we are. So keep talking to people. And as always, feels good to say this. It's been a couple weeks. Keep the conversation going.